The first mistake Marco Bellini made was thinking quiet women did not notice blood in the water. The second was thinking Clara Whitmore was too soft, too shy, and too invisible to understand the shape of a betrayal before it reached the surface. Inside the glass towers of Bellport Shipping, where cargo moved under clean company names and dirty money hid behind perfect spreadsheets, nobody looked twice at the plus-size woman in the grey sweater who stayed late balancing accounts. They saw her lowered eyes. They saw the way she stepped aside in crowded hallways. They saw her rounded body tucked behind a desk and decided she was harmless. They never saw the mind beneath the softness. They never saw the quiet way she listened. They never saw the numbers whispering secrets to her at midnight. And they certainly never saw Dante Moretti standing in the shadows, watching her like she was the only honest thing left in his violent world. Bellport Shipping slept above the harbor like a palace made of black glass. By day, it was all polished floors, bright screens, smiling executives, and the steady movement of containers across the water. By night, when the last clerks went home and the lights of the port turned the fog silver, the building changed. The halls grew too still. The elevators sounded too loud. The security guards stopped pretending not to carry weapons beneath their jackets. Clara had worked there for 4 years, long enough to know which doors were for normal employees and which doors opened only when Dante Moretti visited. No one said his name in full unless they had to. The official records called him a private investor. The newspapers called him a businessman. The streets called him something else entirely, but only in low voices. Clara called him Mr. Moretti when she was forced to speak to him at all, which was almost never. She preferred numbers to people. Numbers did not laugh when she walked by. Numbers did not look at her lunch, then at her body, then away with false kindness. Numbers did not act surprised when she gave the right answer. Numbers were clean, even when people used them for ugly things. They either balanced or they did not. Clara understood that better than anyone in the building. She understood hidden fees, false invoices, washed payments, ghost vendors, and offshore loops. She could look at a ledger and feel when it was lying. It was not magic. It was patience. It was a sharp eye. It was years of being ignored, which had given her all the time in the world to observe. Most people at Bellport treated her like part of the furniture. She was the quiet woman in loose sweaters who refilled her own coffee, stayed at her desk during lunch, and never joined the loud Friday drinks on the 22nd floor. She wore soft cardigans because they felt safe. She kept her dark blonde hair clipped at the back of her neck because it was easier than trying to make herself pretty for a world that had already decided she was not. Her body was wide and soft, her hips heavy, her face round in a way she had once hated in mirrors. Men in suits rarely held the elevator for her. Women with glossy hair gave her the kind of smile that felt like a tiny knife. Clara had learned to move through the world gently, like someone apologizing for taking up space. But Dante Moretti never looked at her that way. That was what frightened her most. He appeared at Bellport without warning, usually after sunset, when the harbor wind pressed rain against the windows and the office lights reflected against the black water below. He moved through the building with quiet command, surrounded by men who looked like they had never lost a fight and never asked forgiveness for winning one. Dante was not loud. He did not need to be. Power rested on him like a tailored coat. He was tall, dark-haired, and calm in a way that felt dangerous, with eyes so deep and steady they made people confess before he even asked a question. Executives stood straighter when he passed. Security guards opened doors before he touched them. Men who thought they were important suddenly remembered they were not. Clara had seen him many times from behind her monitor. She had seen him walk past the finance floor with his black coat open, his silver watch catching the light, his face unreadable. She had seen him stop once beside the coffee station while 2 directors argued over a missing customs payment. He had not raised his voice. He had only asked one question, soft as smoke, and both men had gone pale. Clara had also seen something no one else noticed. She had seen his gaze drift past the directors, past the glass offices, and settle on her. Not briefly, not carelessly. He had looked at her as if he knew exactly where she sat, exactly how late she stayed, exactly how many times she swallowed words instead of speaking them. That look had followed her home for weeks. Clara told herself it meant nothing. Men like Dante Moretti did not notice women like her unless they needed something. They noticed models at charity galas, thin women in silk dresses, women who knew how to laugh beside danger without trembling. Clara trembled when the printer jammed if too many people were watching. She lived in a small apartment above a bakery, watered a dying basil plant on her kitchen windowsill, and fell asleep most nights with her laptop open beside her. She was not made for his world of black cars and locked rooms. She was made for quiet rooms, soft lamps, and balanced accounts. Still, there were strange moments. A fresh coffee left beside her desk during late audits, exactly the way she liked it, with cream and no sugar. A new chair, delivered after she rubbed her lower back one too many times during budget season. A security guard suddenly waiting in the lobby every night until she got into her rideshare. A senior manager who used to mock her sweaters, transferred without explanation, after Dante saw Clara blink back tears in a conference room. None of it came with a note. None of it came with a confession. But Clara knew. Deep down, she knew. Dante Moretti saw too much. On the night everything changed, rain fell hard over the harbor. It tapped against the windows like nervous fingers and blurred the lights of the cranes outside. The finance floor was nearly empty. One intern slept with his forehead on his folded arms near the copy room. A cleaning woman pushed a cart slowly through the far hallway. Clara sat alone under a pool of white light, wrapped in a navy sweater too big for her shoulders, staring at a payment trail that made the back of her neck go cold. At first, it looked like a vendor correction. Bellport worked with hundreds of contractors, fuel suppliers, customs brokers, storage yards, and insurance groups. Money moved all day and all night through systems designed to look boring. Clara had been reviewing the quarter-end accounts because the chief financial officer wanted the reports clean before Monday. It should have been simple, but a payment to a shell company called Meridian Coastal Solutions appeared where it did not belong. The amount was small enough to be missed beside the size of Bellport's real contracts, but large enough to bother her. Then she saw the same company again, under a different routing label. Then again. Clara sat up slowly. The rain kept falling. The sleeping interns snored softly. Somewhere deep in the building, an elevator opened and closed. She pulled the full transfer history and began mapping the accounts. Her fingers moved faster now, the tiredness leaving her body. The money had not been stolen in one dramatic strike. It had been shaved away carefully, week by week, buried beneath fuel charges, port fees, currency adjustments, and emergency storage payments. Whoever had done it was patient. Whoever had done it knew Dante's accounts. By the time Clara finished the first trail, her pulse had climbed into her throat. $7 million had been taken from accounts that did not officially exist. She checked the permissions log and felt the room tilt. Marco Bellini, Dante's trusted lieutenant, had approved the vendor file. Clara stared at the name until the letters seemed to move. Marco was everywhere at Bellport. He wore fine suits and smiled with too many teeth. He joked with receptionists, slapped men on the back, kissed older women on both cheeks, and made everyone feel lucky to have his attention. People liked Marco because he acted warm. Clara had never liked him. Warmth that perfect felt rehearsed. His eyes never smiled. They measured. They weighed. They looked at Clara like she was an object left in the wrong place. She went deeper. Meridian Coastal Solutions was not just fake. It was built to be discovered. Too many records pointed back toward Clara's department. Too many approvals had been copied through her access logs. Too many reports had been edited from her terminal after midnight on days she had not been in the office. Her password had been used. Her employee ID had been planted across the trail like breadcrumbs for wolves. Her stomach turned. This was not only theft, this was a frame. Clara pushed her chair back and stood too quickly, knocking her knee against the desk. Pain shot up her leg, but she barely felt it. She downloaded the raw files, saved the access logs, and sent a copy to a private encrypted folder she had made years ago after a former boss tried to blame her for his accounting mistake. Then she reached for her phone. Dante's direct number was not in her contacts, of course. Men like him did not give numbers to women like her. But Bellport's private security channel had an emergency line. She had seen it once on an internal memo and never forgotten it. Before she could dial, the lights above her desk flickered. The intern was gone. Clara looked toward the copy room. Empty. The cleaning cart stood abandoned near the hallway. Her breathing slowed into something thin and shallow. "Working late again, Clara?" Marco's voice slid out of the darkness behind her, smooth and almost amused. She turned, clutching the phone so tightly her fingers hurt. He stood near the glass wall of the finance floor, dressed in a charcoal suit, his tie loose at the throat, rain shining on his shoulders, as if he had just come in from outside. Two men stood behind him. She did not know them, and that frightened her more than anything. Bellport Security wore dark blue pins on their jackets. These men wore none. "Mr. Bellini," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was just finishing the quarter-end review." Marco smiled. "Were you?" The way he said it made her skin prickle. He walked closer, slow and casual, as though they were discussing a printer issue instead of $7 million missing dollars and her name buried in forged records. Clara backed toward her desk, her hip hitting the edge. Her laptop screen still glowed behind her. She had closed most of the windows, but not all. Marco's eyes flicked to the screen, and his smile faded. "You always were a curious little thing," he said softly. "Quiet, but curious." Clara swallowed. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." He reached her desk and picked up one of the printed transfer sheets. His gaze moved across the page. For a moment, he looked almost disappointed. "I told them not to underestimate you." Hope sparked in her chest for one foolish second. Maybe he was not here to hurt her. Maybe he had found it too. Maybe Dante had sent him. Then Marco looked at her and said, "But I also told them nobody would believe you." The words landed like cold water. Clara stepped sideways, trying to put the desk between them, but one of Marco's men moved fast. His hand closed around her upper arm. She cried out, more from fear than pain, and dropped her phone. It hit the carpet without a sound. She twisted, trying to pull free, but he held her easily. Her body, the body she had spent years trying not to hate, suddenly felt too heavy, too slow, too trapped inside her own panic. "Please," she whispered, "don't do this." Marco sighed as if she had inconvenienced him. "I was hoping you would be asleep at your desk. It would have made this simpler." "You stole from him," Clara said, her voice shaking. "You stole from Dante." Marco's face changed. The charm drained away, leaving something flat and bitter underneath. "Dante has more than enough. Men like him sit on thrones and call it loyalty when everyone else bleeds for them. I built half his port network. I cleaned his messes. I buried his enemies. And what did I get? A pat on the shoulder, a smaller office. His trust, maybe. Trust is pretty, but it does not buy freedom. You'll never get away with it." That made him laugh. "Oh, Clara," he said, stepping close enough for her to smell mint on his breath. "I already have. The money is gone. The files point to you. By sunrise, the Moretti family will believe a lonely financial analyst got greedy, panicked, and ran. Dante will be angry. He may even be sad for a day. He has a soft spot for broken things." Clara flinched. Marco noticed. His smile returned, crueler now. "Yes," he murmured. "I know he watches you. Everyone close to him knows. The great Dante Moretti, feared from the docks to the courthouse, staring through glass walls at the shy girl in the oversized sweaters. It would be sweet if it were not so pathetic. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry in front of him. "You don't know anything about him," she said. Marco tilted his head. "And you do?" Clara had no answer. She knew Dante's silence. She knew his coffee left beside her keyboard. She knew the guard in the lobby and the way cruel people disappeared from her daily path after he saw too much. She knew his eyes held violence, yes, but also a strange, steady gentleness when they found her. Maybe that was nothing. Maybe she had built a dream from scraps because lonely people were good at making warmth out of shadows. But she knew one more thing. Dante Moretti would not forgive betrayal. Marco's man forced her arms behind her. A strip of tape closed over her wrists. Clara gasped, panic rushing through her so fast the room blurred. She tried to plant her feet, tried to use her weight to stop them from moving her, but the second man grabbed her other arm. Her sweater twisted, her shoulder burned. Shame flashed through her even then, sharp and useless, because fear had a way of dragging every old insecurity into the light. She hated that they were touching her. She hated that they were pulling her. She hated that part of her still wanted to apologize for being difficult to move. Marco picked up her phone from the carpet and slipped it into his pocket. Then he leaned over her laptop and typed quickly. Clara watched, helpless, as he opened her company email. He attached several files, forged files, transfer approvals, fake messages, a confession written in clean, empty language she would never use. "No," she said, struggling harder. "No, stop, please. Dante will know I didn't write that." Marco glanced at her. "Maybe. But will the other families? Will the old men who already think Dante is too distracted, too emotional, too soft with his people? A theft like this makes him look weak. A hidden analyst stealing from under his nose makes him look blind. And if he protects you after the evidence points your way, it makes him look compromised." Clara went still. That was the true trap. Not only money, not only blame. Marco wanted to turn Dante's own world against him. The elevator at the far end of the floor opened with a quiet chime. For one wild second, Clara thought it might be Dante. Her heart leapt so hard it hurt. But no one stepped out. The doors stayed open, waiting. Marco's hand settled at the small of her back, almost polite. Time to go. They moved her through the silent office, past the rows of empty desks and sleeping monitors, past the break room where someone had left a mug in the sink, past the wall of windows where the harbor lights shimmered beneath the rain. Clara looked back once at her desk. Her chair sat slightly crooked. Her coffee had gone cold. Her life had been sitting there only minutes ago, small and quiet, and hers. Then the elevator doors closed. Downstairs, they took her through the loading entrance instead of the lobby. A black van waited beneath the awning, its engine running, its back doors open like a mouth. Rain blew sideways across the concrete. Clara tried once more to twist away, but the man behind her tightened his grip until pain burst through her arms. Marco leaned close as they pushed her into the van. "You should have stayed invisible," he said. The doors slammed shut, sealing her inside the dark. Across the city, on the top floor of a private club with no sign on the door, Dante Moretti stopped in the middle of a sentence. The room around him was filled with men who had spent their lives learning not to show fear. They sat around a long table beneath low amber lights, speaking of routes, payments, judges, favors, and enemies. Marco's empty chair had gone unnoticed by most. Dante had noticed. He noticed everything. But for the last hour, a different unease had been crawling under his skin, slow and cold. Clara had not left Bellport. His security man had not sent the usual confirmation. The lobby guard had not reported her rideshare. and the emergency line had received a call that lasted 3 seconds before cutting out. Dante lifted one hand, and the room fell silent. His phone vibrated on the table. A message appeared from Bellport's internal finance account, Clara Whitmore's account. Dante opened it, read the first line, and felt the world narrow to a single point. "I'm sorry. I took the money." No one spoke. Dante read the words again. Then he looked at the attached files, the transfer approvals, the planted records, the cold little trail designed for fools. His face did not change, not at first. But the men closest to him leaned back without realizing it, because the air around Dante had shifted. The room felt suddenly smaller, darker, harder to breathe in. Clara would never write that message. Clara used full sentences. Clara double-checked punctuation in routine memos. Clara apologized when someone else blocked a hallway. Clara would never steal from him. Clara would never run. And even if every account in the city screamed her guilt, Dante knew the truth with a certainty so deep it felt carved into bone. Someone had taken her. His hand closed around the phone until the glass cracked. "Lock down the harbor," Dante said. One of his captains blinked. "Boss?" Dante stood slowly. The amber light caught the hard line of his jaw and the empty black fury in his eyes. "Every road out of the city, every private airfield, every dock, every customs gate, every man who owes me a favor wakes up now." His voice was quiet, but it moved through the room like a blade. "Find Marco Bellini." The name struck the table like thunder. Dante turned toward the windows, where rain painted the city in silver lines. Somewhere out there, Clara was afraid. His Clara. The woman who moved through the world like she had been taught to expect nothing, while carrying a mind sharp enough to cut through empires. The woman who softened his evenings without knowing it. The woman he had watched too long and protected too quietly because he had told himself distance was mercy. Distance had not saved her. Silence had not saved her. So now the city would learn what happened when Dante Moretti stopped being silent. He looked back at his men, and the last trace of calm left his face. "Bring me the woman," he said, "and bring me the traitor who touched her." The city did not sleep that night. It only pretended to. Rain slid down the windows of private clubs, police stations, harbor offices, and silent penthouses, while Dante Moretti's name moved through the streets like a warning no one wanted to hear twice. Doors opened that had been locked for years. Old debts were remembered. Men who had once sworn they were out of the life picked up phones with shaking hands. Every dock camera, every toll booth, every airport worker, every night guard who had ever accepted a Moretti envelope was suddenly awake and looking for one thing. A quiet woman with frightened blue eyes and a soft navy sweater, taken from the place Dante had promised himself would always be safe enough for her. Clara woke to the smell of rust, salt, and old wood. For a few seconds, she did not remember where she was. Her head hurt. Her wrists burned where the tape had rubbed her skin raw. A weak yellow light swung above her, moving slowly in the draft, making shadows crawl over stacked crates and broken machinery. Rain hammered the roof somewhere high above. The sound was hollow and lonely, like the building itself had been abandoned by the world. She tried to move and realized she was tied to a metal chair. Panic rose in her throat, thick and hot, but she swallowed it down. She had spent too many years being afraid in small ways, afraid of being laughed at, afraid of being noticed, afraid of eating in public, afraid of speaking up and hearing that soft silence people gave when they were surprised someone like her had something smart to say. This fear was bigger. This fear had teeth. But underneath it, in a place Marco Bellini could not touch, Clara's mind was still clear. She looked around slowly. Not a warehouse near the main port, she thought. Too quiet. Too much open air. The smell of brine was strong, but there were no active cranes nearby. No engines, No workers shouting in the distance. Somewhere older, maybe one of the unused cold storage buildings along the South Harbor. She had seen payments for those properties, tiny maintenance fees buried under old company codes. Most people forgot dead assets. Clara never did. A door groaned open across the room. Marco walked in with his coat folded over one arm, as if he had arrived for a meeting instead of a kidnapping. Behind him came two men she did not know, and one older man in a dark green raincoat. He had silver hair, a narrow face, and the patient eyes of someone who enjoyed watching other people lose. Clara did not know his name, but she knew the family mark on the ring he wore, a black falcon set into gold. Valenti, a rival family from the east side, hungry for Moretti roots and old enough to hate Dante for breathing. Marco followed her gaze and smiled. Still counting details, Clara? She said nothing. The older man stepped closer. This is her? Marco nodded. This is Dante's weakness. Clara's stomach turned, but she made herself look at the man directly. I'm a financial analyst. The older man smiled faintly. No, dear. A financial analyst can be replaced. You were taken, and Dante Moretti put the city on its knees in less than an hour. That makes you something far more useful. Marco set a laptop on a crate in front of her, her own company laptop. The sight of it made her pulse jump. He had brought it for a reason. He needed something from her. You are going to open your private folder, Marco said. The one you made before I walked in. Clara kept her face still, but inside, fear sharpened into understanding. He knew she had copied the raw files, but he could not access them. Her encryption had locked him out. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Marco gave a soft, disappointed sigh. Please don't insult me. I watched the system logs. You moved something off the network. I need it gone. Then you should have done a better job hiding your theft. His smile disappeared. For the first time, Clara felt a small, dangerous spark of satisfaction. It was foolish. She was tied to a chair in an abandoned building with criminals standing around her. But the truth was still the truth. Marco had made mistakes. Men like him always did when they believed cleverness and power were the same thing. The older Valenti man leaned over the laptop. Make her unlock it. Marco crouched in front of Clara. His voice lowered, turning soft in a way that made her skin crawl. Clara, I am giving you a chance to survive this. Dante will come for you. I know that. But when he comes, the family heads will already have the evidence. They will see your confession. They will see transfers from your terminal. They will believe Dante let a woman steal from him because he was too distracted to see clearly. And when he defends you, they will question his judgment. Then the Valentis will move on his docks, and I will walk away rich. You won't, Clara whispered. Marco tilted his head. She looked him in the eye. Her voice shook, but the words came out clean. You won't walk away. You are too proud. You wanted people to know you were smarter than him, so you left a signature somewhere. Maybe not your name, maybe not your account, but something, a timing pattern, a routing habit, a vendor code. You couldn't resist. The older man's eyes shifted toward Marco. Marco stood up too fast. For 1 second, Clara saw it. Not fear exactly, but irritation sharpened by worry. She had touched the truth. Before he could answer, a phone buzzed in his hand. He checked the screen. His face tightened. Moretti found the van. The Valenti man cursed under his breath. Marco pointed to one of his men. Move the cars to the back. Now. Then he turned to Clara, and all the false charm was gone. Open the folder. No. The word surprised even her. It was small, but it stayed standing. Marco stared at her. No? Clara's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her wrists. No. He stepped close, but before he could touch her, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the warehouse. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The rain kept beating against the roof. Somewhere outside, a distant engine growled. Then another, then many. The first gunshot cracked through the night like the sky splitting open. Clara screamed and ducked as far as the chair allowed. Men shouted. The warehouse doors burst inward with a heavy crash, and white headlights flooded the room, cutting through dust and rain like blades. Marco grabbed the laptop and ran toward the rear exit. The Valenti man shouted his name, but Marco did not look back. Clara heard Dante before she saw him. Clara. Her name in his voice cut straight through the chaos. He moved through the light and shadow like something the darkness had created, and then obeyed. His black coat was soaked from the rain. His face was calm, but his eyes were not. His men spread through the warehouse around him, fast and silent, forcing the Valentis back, taking control of the room with cold precision. Dante did not look at them, not once. His whole world had narrowed to the woman tied to the chair beneath the swinging light. He reached her and dropped to one knee. For a moment, neither of them spoke. His hands went to the tape at her wrists, careful despite the violence moving around them. "Did they hurt you?" Clara tried to answer, but her voice broke. Dante looked up. His gaze moved over her face, her bruised arms, the red marks at her wrists, the tear in her sweater. Something ancient and terrible passed through his expression, but when he touched her cheek, his hand was gentle. "I'm here," he said. "You're safe now." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to fold into that voice and forget the warehouse, the rain, the laptop, Marco's smile. But then she remembered the confession, the fake records, the families, the trap closing around him. "Marco escaped," she said quickly. "He took my laptop. He knows I copied the files. Dante. He's working with the Valentis. The evidence is fake. He planted it through my access logs. He wants the other families to think I stole from you so they'll turn against you." Dante cut the last strip of tape and freed her hands. "I know you didn't steal from me. You need proof. I need you alive. You need proof," Clara repeated, stronger this time. His jaw tightened. "Clara." She leaned forward, ignoring the pain in her wrists. "Listen to me. The files he has are staged. The real trail is in a private backup. He couldn't erase it because he couldn't open it. I can still prove what he did if I get to a clean system." Dante stared at her, and for the first time since entering the warehouse, something other than rage moved across his face. Wonder. Fierce, unwilling wonder. Around them, the fight was ending. The Valenti men were down or surrendering. The older man in the green raincoat was on his knees near the crates, two of Dante's guards holding him in place. But Dante still did not look away from Clara. "You were tied to a chair," he said quietly, "and you were studying the room." Clara let out a shaky breath that almost became a laugh. "I was scared. I know. I'm still scared. I know. But I can help." His hand closed around hers, warm and steady over her trembling fingers. "You already have." He lifted her from the chair as if her weight meant nothing, as if softness had never been something to apologize for. Clara instinctively tensed, embarrassment flashing through her, even in the middle of everything. Dante felt it. His arms tightened, not painfully, but with a firm certainty that made her breath catch. "Do not shrink from me," he murmured, close to her ear. "Not now, not ever again." Rain hit Clara's face as he carried her out through the broken warehouse doors. The harbor opened around them, black water shining beneath storm clouds, police sirens far away, and carefully delayed by men who knew better than to arrive too soon. Dante placed her inside his car, wrapped his coat around her shoulders, and climbed in beside her. The doors closed, sealing them in leather, warmth, and the faint scent of rain. For a moment, Clara's strength faded. She stared down at her wrists and began to shake. Dante reached for her carefully, giving her time to pull away. She did not. She let him take her hands. He looked at the raw marks with such quiet fury that tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were not from fear alone. "I should have brought you closer," he said. Clara looked up. "What?" His voice was low. I watched you from a distance because I told myself my world would ruin anything soft. I thought if I kept guards near you and trouble away from you, it would be enough. But I left you standing alone in a building full of men who did not deserve to breathe the same air as you. You didn't take me, Clara whispered. Marco did. Dante's eyes lifted to hers, and Marco will answer for it. There was no shouting in his promise. That made it more frightening. They took her not to his home, but to a secure office hidden above a closed restaurant near the river. It smelled faintly of espresso, lemon polish, and old brick. A doctor cleaned her wrists and checked the bruise along her temple, while Dante stood nearby, silent as a statue, refusing to leave, even when Clara softly told him she was fine. She was not fine. They both knew it. But she was upright, breathing, and already looking toward the computer one of his men had set on the table. 10 minutes, the doctor said. She needs rest. Clara shook her head. I need the system. Dante looked at the doctor. Give her whatever she needs. The doctor muttered something in Italian and stepped back. Clara sat at the table wrapped in Dante's coat, her hair loose around her face, her wrists bandaged, her sweater torn at one shoulder. She looked nothing like the polished women who usually moved through rooms like this. She looked exhausted, bruised, soft, human. But when the screen lit up and her fingers touched the keyboard, everything about her changed. Her breathing steadied, her eyes sharpened. The fear did not disappear, but it moved aside for the part of her that understood patterns better than panic. Dante watched from across the table. Clara opened her encrypted backup and pulled the raw data into a clean ledger. One of Dante's tech men leaned over her shoulder for less than 30 seconds before she calmly told him he was blocking the light. He stepped back immediately. Dante almost smiled, but the expression vanished when the first hidden account opened. There, Clara said. Marco used my access, but not my workflow. Dante came closer. Explain it to me. She pointed to the transfer chain. Every analyst has habits, tiny ones. I label manual reviews with full date stamps. I never abbreviate vendor names on internal notes. Whoever staged this used my credentials, but they didn't know how I work. They copied my login, not my behavior. She opened another file. This is the fake shell company, Meridian Coastal Solutions. It looks independent, but the incorporation documents were paid through a legal service in Queens. That service also filed papers for 3 Valenti companies last year. Marco tried to hide the connection behind a blind trust, but he reused the same registered agent. Dante's eyes darkened. Careless. No, Clara said. Arrogant. His gaze moved to her face. She clicked into the timing logs. And this is the real theft. Marco moved the money through fuel adjustment invoices, then converted it through a Maltese holding account. He didn't send it straight to himself. He routed it through a charity foundation attached to Valenti construction contracts. But here's the part he couldn't fake. She pulled up a set of approval records and enlarged the screen. Dante went still. Clara's voice softened. The biometric key. Marco had approved the earliest vendor creation with his own security token. Not her login, not a stolen password, his physical key, a clean mistake buried at the beginning because he never thought anyone would look back far enough. Dante leaned one hand on the table. Can this be shown to the council? Yes, Clara said, but there's more. She traced the final transfer, the one Marco had planned to use to leave the country. The money had been split into 5 pieces, but one destination stood out. A private aircraft escrow service under a false name. Departure scheduled before sunrise from a small airfield outside the city. Clara looked up at Dante. He's running. Dante's phone was already in his hand. Where? She turned the screen toward him. North Ridge Airfield. Hangar 6. He has maybe 40 minutes. The room changed instantly. Men moved. Phones lit. Weapons disappeared beneath coats. Dante gave orders in a calm voice that made everyone obey faster than shouting ever could. Clara sat back, suddenly cold all over. She had done it. She had found the proof. She had found Marco. Now Dante was going to leave, and some part of her feared the night would swallow him too. He turned back to her as if he had felt the thought. "Stay here," he said. "You'll be guarded." Clara nodded, then shook her head. "Dante." He stopped. She stood slowly, gripping the table to steady herself. "Don't kill him before he talks." A faint, humorless smile touched Dante's mouth. "You think I lack restraint? I think you love betrayal about as much as you love being told no." For a second, the men in the room became very interested in the floor. Dante looked at Clara, and there it was again. That wonder, that warmth hidden inside all the danger. "What do you need from him?" he asked. "Names," she said. "Dates. Which family heads he contacted. What evidence he already sent. If you silence him too fast, the lie may keep moving without him." Dante walked back to her. He was close enough now that she could see the rain drying in his hair and the tiredness beneath his eyes. He lifted one hand and gently touched the edge of her bandaged wrist, not quite holding it. "You are asking me to spare the man who hurt you." "No," Clara said softly. "I'm asking you to be smarter than him." Dante stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "For you," he said, "I will be." Marco Bellini almost made it to the sky. By the time Dante reached Northridge Airfield, the private jet was fueled, the stairs were down, and Marco was crossing the wet pavement with a leather bag in one hand and Clara's laptop in the other. He was not smiling anymore. The smooth, charming mask was gone. He looked smaller under the hangar lights, like a man who had dressed himself in power and discovered too late that it did not fit. Dante stepped from the darkness at the edge of the runway. Marco stopped. For a moment, the only sound was rain ticking against metal. "You should have left the city faster," Dante said. Marco laughed, but it came out thin. "You should have watched your little analyst better." Dante's men spread out behind him, blocking every exit. Marco looked toward the jet, then toward the dark road, then back at Dante. His hand twitched near his coat. "Do not," Dante said quietly. Marco froze. The old friendship between them hung there for one brief, bitter second. Years of shared rooms, shared secrets, shared blood. Dante had trusted him. That was what made the betrayal ugly, not the money. Money could be earned, stolen, burned, replaced. Trust, once broken, left a smell in the room forever. "You were my brother," Dante said. Marco's face twisted. "I was your shadow. You chose that." "No, you chose it for me. You stood in the light. I cleaned the floor after you." Dante's expression did not move. "You took Clara." Marco smiled with the last of his courage. "That is what truly bothers you, isn't it? Not the accounts, not the Valentis. Her. A quiet, overweight bookkeeper with sad eyes, and somehow she made the great Dante Moretti forget how to think." Dante stepped closer. Marco lifted his chin. "Go ahead. Prove me right. Hurt me because I touched your weakness." Dante stopped just in front of him. His voice dropped. "She is not my weakness." Marco's smile flickered. "She is the reason you lost." One of Dante's men took the laptop from Marco's hand. Another removed the weapon from his coat. Marco did not fight. He had finally understood. Dante was angry, yes. More angry than any man at that airfield wanted to imagine. But Clara had reached him before the rage did. She had asked him to be smarter. So Dante let Marco talk. By dawn, the lie was dead. Marco gave names because men like him always believed there was still a bargain to be made. He gave dates, accounts, contacts, and the family heads who had agreed to question Dante's rule once the fake evidence spread. He admitted the Valenti alliance. He admitted the stolen money. He admitted Clara had found him before anyone else. Every word was recorded, every confession sent through channels older and darker than the law. When the council gathered that evening in the private dining room of an old hotel near the water, Clara stood beside Dante instead of behind him. She had not wanted to go at first. Her wrists still ached, her body felt heavy with exhaustion. Her mind replayed the warehouse whenever a door closed too loudly. But when Dante said the family heads needed to hear the truth, Clara knew hiding would only let Marco's shadow linger. So she dressed in a deep blue wrap dress Dante's staff had quietly brought her, soft enough to feel safe, elegant enough to make her stand straighter. It did not hide her body, it honored it. For once, Clara did not cover herself with a cardigan before entering the room. The old men noticed. So did Dante. His gaze swept over her, slow and full of something too deep to be simple desire. Pride, maybe. Relief. Possession, yes, but not the kind that made her smaller, the kind that stood beside her like a locked door between her and the world. At the head of the table, one gray-haired captain looked Clara up and down with open doubt. "This is the Analyst?" Clara felt the old instinct rise, the urge to lower her eyes, to make her voice soft, to become easy to ignore. Dante's hand brushed the small of her back, not pushing, not guiding, just there. Clara lifted her chin. Yes. The room quieted. She walked them through the proof in a clear, steady voice. She showed the planted access logs, the fake confession, the shell company, the Valenti connection, the biometric approval, the stolen funds, and Marco's escape account. She did not dramatize it. She did not plead. She simply opened the numbers and let them speak. The men at the table listened first with doubt, then silence, then something close to respect. By the time Marco's recorded confession played through the speakers, no one was looking at Clara like she was invisible. When it ended, Dante stood. "Marco Bellini betrayed this family," he said. "Clara Whitmore saved it." No one argued. The gray-haired captain who had doubted her looked down at the files, then back at Clara. "You found all this alone?" Clara's heart beat hard, but she did not look away. "Yes." He nodded once. It was not warm, it was not kind, but in that world, from that man, it was a bow. Afterward, Dante took her to the roof of the hotel. The storm had finally passed. The city below glittered clean and cold. The harbor lights scattered across the black water like fallen stars. Clara stood near the edge, wrapped in Dante's coat again, feeling the night air touch her face. She should have been relieved. She was. But relief was strange after terror. It arrived slowly, like a door opening in a house you thought was empty. Dante stood beside her, silent for a long time. "What happens to Marco?" she asked. "He will never touch you again." Clara looked at him. Dante's face remained turned toward the city. "That is the only answer I can give you that will let you sleep." She accepted that. Maybe she should not have. Maybe a different woman in a different story would have demanded cleaner justice. But Clara had seen the shape of Dante's world now. She had seen its teeth. She also knew Marco had built a trap that could have destroyed them both. Some endings did not come softly. Some doors closed in the dark. "And the stolen money?" she asked. "Recovered." "The Valentis?" "Quiet. For now?" Dante's mouth curved slightly. "You are learning." Clara hugged the coat tighter around herself. "I don't know if that's good. It may keep you alive." She turned to him. "Is that what I am now? Alive?" His expression softened. He faced her fully, the city glowing behind him. "You are whatever you choose to be." The answer startled her. Men like Dante gave orders. They did not usually offer choices. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small velvet box. Clara's breath caught, but when he opened it, there was no ring inside. Instead, there was a key card made of black metal, engraved with the Bellport Shipping crest and her name, Clara Whitmore. Chief Financial Strategist. She stared at it. Dante watched her carefully. Not a gift, not a cage, a position. Full authority over every account, legal and otherwise. You answer to no one but me, and even I will know better than to interrupt when you are working. A laugh broke out of her before she could stop it. It was small and shaky, but real. You're giving me the books. I am giving you the Empire's pulse. That sounds dangerous. It is. I could ruin you. Dante stepped closer. You could have done that already. Clara looked down at the card, then at the city, then at the man who had watched her for years from behind glass and shadows. Why me? Dante's eyes moved over her face with quiet intensity. Because you see what others miss. Because you are kind in a place that punishes kindness. Because when everyone else looked at you and saw someone easy to overlook, I saw the only person in the room who was not pretending. And because the first time I saw you calm a panicked junior analyst with one hand on a calculator and coffee spilled all over your sweater, I wanted to know what it would feel like to come home to that kind of peace. Clara's throat tightened. You noticed that? I noticed everything. For years, Clara had thought being seen would feel like standing under a cruel spotlight. She thought it would burn, but this felt different. This felt like warmth after a long winter. Frightening, yes. Too intense, maybe, but real. I was scared of you, she whispered. You should be, a little. She smiled despite herself. That's not comforting. I am not a comforting man. No, Clara said softly, but you carried me out of the dark. Dante's gaze dropped to her lips, then returned to her eyes, asking a question without surrendering his pride enough to say it aloud. Clara answered by stepping closer. She placed one bandaged hand against his chest and felt the steady beat beneath his black shirt. This man was dangerous. There was no pretending otherwise. But he had believed her before the proof. He had burned the city awake to find her. He had listened when she asked him to think instead of destroy. And when he looked at her body, her softness, her face, her fear, he did not see something lacking. He saw Clara. His hand rose slowly to her cheek. Tell me to stop. She shook her head. Dante kissed her like the city had finally gone quiet. Not rushed, not careless. His mouth moved against hers with a restrained hunger that made her knees weaken and her heart ache. Clara had been kissed before by men who acted as if they were doing her a favor. Dante kissed her like restraint was the only thing saving the world from what he truly felt. His hand curved around her waist, firm and reverent, drawing her closer until her softness pressed against him, and, for the first time in her life, she did not pull away from being felt. When the kiss ended, he rested his forehead against hers. You are not invisible anymore, he said. Clara closed her eyes. Maybe I never was. No, Dante murmured. You never were. Months later, Bellport Shipping changed in ways the outside world could not understand. Executives who once spoke over Clara now waited for her to finish. Men who had laughed at her sweaters now stood when she entered the room. The accounts were cleaner, the routes safer, the hidden money harder to steal. Rumors spread along the docks about the soft-spoken woman with the sharp mind who could find a lie in 1,000 pages of numbers. Some called her Dante's Analyst. Some called her the woman who caught Marco Bellini. The smarter ones called her Mom. Clara still wore sweaters when she wanted to. Soft ones, rich ones, in colors she had once been too shy to choose. She still loved quiet mornings, strong coffee, and the satisfaction of a perfect ledger. But she no longer folded herself smaller in elevators. She no longer apologized when someone moved around her. She took up space at Dante's right hand, in boardrooms, in private meetings, in the silent rooms where men weighed loyalty against fear. And Dante, feared by the city and obeyed by men who never obeyed lightly, learned to pause when Clara touched his wrist. He learned to bring problems to her before they became wars. He learned that power did not always enter a room with raised voices and blood on its sleeves. Sometimes it entered quietly, in a blue dress or a soft cardigan, carrying a folder of numbers no one else had bothered to read. On the night Bellport signed the new harbor contracts, Dante found Clara alone by the windows of his office, looking down at the ships moving slowly through the dark water. "You're missing your own celebration," he said. She smiled without turning. "I like it better from here." He came to stand behind her, his hands settling gently at her waist. "Still watching the numbers?" "Always." "And what do they say?" Clara leaned back against him, no longer afraid of her weight, her warmth, or the space she filled. Below them, the harbor moved like a living thing, steady and deep. Behind them, the empire she had saved waited for her next command. "They say everything balances," she whispered. Dante pressed a kiss to her temple. "Then we keep going." Clara looked out over the city that had once nearly swallowed her, and felt no urge to hide from it anymore. She had been the quiet woman in the oversized sweater, the one everyone underestimated, the one no one thought to protect until it was almost too late. But she had followed the numbers through fear, through darkness, through betrayal, and found the truth waiting beneath it all. She had not been saved because she was helpless. She had been found because she mattered. And beside Dante Moretti, with the harbor lights shining like gold beneath the night, Clara Whitmore finally understood that her softness had never been weakness, her silence had never been emptiness, and her invisible life had only been the beginning of the woman she was becoming. A dessert cart rolling through the private elevator of the Crown Meridian should not have been able to change the balance of power in an entire city, but on that frozen winter night, one silver tray, one hidden language, and one woman everyone had learned to ignore became more dangerous than any gun in the room. Above the glittering casino floor, where rich men lost fortunes beneath chandeliers and soft music, a sealed rooftop dining room waited behind armed guards and soundproof glass. Inside, Lucian Vale, the quietest and most feared casino owner in the city, was about to sign an agreement that would open his empire to a foreign criminal network. He did not know the interpreter beside him was lying. He did not know the man across the table had already planned his death. And he certainly did not know that his only warning would come from Nadia Kowalska, a fat pastry chef with flour on her sleeves, cold fear in her chest, and 3 words scratched into chocolate. Nadia was not supposed to be there. Everyone at the Crown Meridian made sure she understood that. The casino had been built inside a restored riverfront hotel, the kind of place with carved stone balconies, polished brass doors, and velvet ropes that separated important people from everyone else. On the gaming floors, women in shining dresses served champagne to men with black cards and dead eyes. In the private lounges, dealers smiled like secrets, while chips moved across green felt tables in stacks, tall enough to pay rent for a year. But below all of that, beneath the music and perfume and soft golden light, the kitchen burned hot and loud, full of steam, sugar, steel, and shouting. That was where Nadia belonged, according to management, downstairs, out of sight, behind swinging doors. She was 32 years old, broad-hipped, heavy-breasted, round-faced, and unapologetically large, in a building that worshipped narrow waists and glossy surfaces. She had strong hands from kneading dough, a sharp tongue from too many years of being talked over, and the kind of face people remembered only after they needed something from her. She could build a sugar sculpture so delicate it looked like frozen lace. She could pipe buttercream roses with one hand while correcting a cook's timing with the other. She knew exactly when caramel would burn by scent alone, and yet, when the casino hosted charity galas, investor dinners, or private events for celebrities, Nadia's desserts went upstairs without her. The official reason was always polish. The Crown Meridian had an image. Nadia did not fit it. She was too blunt with executives, too practical with guests, too unwilling to laugh when rich men made little jokes. Mostly, though, she was too large. No one ever said it directly, in a way that could get them sued. They said she was better in the kitchen. They said she was more comfortable behind the scenes. They said the guests expected a certain presentation. Nadia had heard every soft version of the same insult. So she stayed below the casino floor, making beautiful things for people who would never know her name. On that night, she was finishing the final dessert for a rooftop dinner she had not been allowed to plate in person. It was a winter showpiece, dark chocolate mousse hidden under a blown sugar dome, with pear, cardamom, and a thin ribbon of bitter cherry sauce that looked like red silk against black stoneware. The pastry team stood around her station, watching in tense silence as she placed the last sugar piece into position. It curved upward like a frozen crown. The dessert was meant for Lucian Vale himself. No one said his name too loudly in the kitchen. Lucian owned the Crown Meridian, but that was only the clean part of his kingdom. Everyone in the building knew pieces of the truth. They knew his casinos were more than casinos. They knew the armored trucks that came at strange hours were not only carrying legal cash. They knew certain men used back hallways without signing visitor logs. They knew federal agents sometimes sat at the bar pretending to drink soda water while watching the private elevator. But no one talked about it. Not if they liked having a paycheck. Not if they wanted to go home safe. Nadia had built her life around not getting close to men like Lucian Vale. Years before the Crown Meridian, before the bakery debt, before the long nights in the pastry kitchen, she had been a court interpreter, Polish and English, sometimes Russian, sometimes rough street slang that made prosecutors blink and judges ask for clarification. She had sat in courtrooms and translated testimony from frightened witnesses who looked over their shoulders before speaking. She had learned how language changed when people lied. She had learned how a guilty man breathed when his own words trapped him. She had also learned that truth could make enemies. The trafficking trial had ended her old life. Nadia had translated for one of the witnesses, a young woman from Krakow whose voice shook so badly that Nadia still sometimes heard it in her dreams. After the conviction, the threats started. A note under her apartment door, a man following her from the courthouse. A phone call in Polish telling her that women who spoke too much could be taught silence. The police took reports. The court moved on. Nadia did not. She left interpretation, buried her certifications in a box, and promised herself she would never again sit between criminals and their secrets. The promise had held for years. Then her father died, and her mother's bakery began to collapse under bills, repairs, and a loan Nadia had not known existed until a man with diamond rings and dead eyes came to collect. The lender was violent in the polished way men became when they had other people do the beating. He had lent her father money during a bad winter, then buried the debt under fees until the bakery was more trap than inheritance. Nadia worked double shifts at the casino and sent most of her paycheck home, but every month the number grew. Every month her mother sounded smaller on the phone. So Nadia kept her head down. She worked. She endured. She told herself survival was not the same as surrender. The problem began 10 minutes before dessert service, when a junior manager named Colin rushed into the pastry kitchen with his headset crooked and panic shining on his forehead. He never came downstairs unless something had gone wrong upstairs. His eyes swept past the line cooks, past the dish station, and landed on Nadia with obvious reluctance. The rooftop server slipped near the staff stairs, he said. Sprained ankle. Maybe worse. We need the final dessert delivered now. Nadia looked at him over the rim of her glasses. Send Mara. Mara is not cleared for the rooftop. Then send you. Colin swallowed. They specifically asked that no unfamiliar staff enter except whoever prepared the dessert. Security is waiting. The kitchen went quiet in that special way. People got quiet when someone had been handed bad news in public. Nadia understood immediately. If anything went wrong, Colin wanted her responsible. If Lucian Vale hated the dessert, Nadia would be blamed. If one of the private guests complained about a fat woman interrupting their elegant dinner, Nadia would be blamed for that too. She wiped her hands on a towel and looked at the dessert cart. The silver domes gleamed under the kitchen lights. "Fine," she said. "But if anyone asks why I'm there, tell them the kitchen doesn't run on magic." Colin gave a weak little laugh. Nadia did not smile back. The elevator ride to the rooftop felt too long. The private service lift moved smoothly, but Nadia could feel every floor pass through her bones. She stood beside the cart with her hands wrapped around the rail, watching her reflection in the mirrored wall. Her chef's coat was clean, but not flattering. Her black pants were dusted with flour at one thigh. A strand of dark hair had escaped her bun and curled damply against her cheek. She looked tired. She looked real. In the world above her, that was almost a crime. When the elevator opened, 2 guards in dark suits turned toward her at once. They did not look like regular casino security. Regular casino security wore earpieces and smiled at guests. These men had the stillness of locked doors. One checked her badge, the other lifted the silver domes, inspected the desserts, then waved a scanner along the underside of the cart. Nadia waited without speaking. Fear had a smell, and the hallway was full of it. At the end of the corridor, the rooftop dining room waited behind carved black doors. Beyond the glass walls, the river glittered under winter fog. The city stretched below in cold gold and silver, beautiful from far away, in the way dangerous things often were. A guard opened the door, and Nadia pushed the cart inside. The first thing she noticed was silence. Not peace, silence. Heavy, careful, and full of teeth. Lucian Vale sat at the head of the table with his back to the city. He was not loud, not restless, not showing off the way powerful men often did when they needed others to believe in their power. He wore a charcoal suit without a wrinkle, his black hair brushed back, his face calm in a way that made calm feel threatening. He was handsome, but not in a soft way. His face looked like it had been made by decisions rather than beauty. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes, a mouth that seemed more used to giving orders than smiling. 2 of his men stood behind him, watchful and quiet. Across from him sat Tomasz Radecki, and Nadia's hand tightened around the cart before she could stop herself. She knew the name, not personally, not from court, but from whispers that crossed oceans. Tomasz led a European consortium that prosecutors loved to describe as sophisticated, which usually meant they hurt people in several countries at once. He was older than Lucian, with silver hair, pale eyes, and the pleasant expression of a man who enjoyed watching others become uncomfortable. His guards stood near the windows, too many of them, too close to the exits. Between Lucian and Tomasz sat Stefan, the interpreter, thin, sweating, his collar too tight around his neck, fingers trembling around a glass of water. Nadia noticed him, because interpreters noticed other interpreters. They noticed breath, posture, rhythm, hesitation. Stefan looked like a man trying not to drown in a room with no water. Nadia lowered her eyes and moved to the sideboard, pretending to be nothing more than kitchen staff. It was an old skill. People spoke freely around workers they believed were beneath them. Maids, drivers, servers, cooks. Invisible people carried more secrets than safes. Lucian spoke first, his voice low and even. "You may use the Eastern gaming rooms for limited movement only. My accountants see every transaction. My security remains mine. Your men do not enter the vault level. Those are the terms." Nadia placed the first dessert plate onto the service tray. Stefan began translating into Polish. Her fingers froze. That was not what he said. Stefan's Polish was smooth enough to fool a man who did not speak it, but not smooth enough to fool Nadia. He told Tomasz that Lucian had agreed to unrestricted access to the casino network. He said Tomasz's men would receive shared authority over security movements. He said foreign transactions would remain private and untouched by Lucian's accountants. It was not a mistake. It was not nerves. It was betrayal. Nadia kept her face blank. Her heart had begun to slam against her ribs, but her hands continued moving. She had learned long ago that panic was safest when hidden inside routine. Lift the dome. Place the plate. Turn the sugar crown toward the guest. Breathe through the nose. Do not look shocked. Do not become interesting. Tomasz leaned back slightly, his pale eyes flicking toward Stefan with satisfaction. Then he murmured in Polish, soft enough that he believed only his own side could understand. After midnight, the consultants enter through the south service gate. Security uniforms, clean papers. The counterfeit cash goes into Vale's private vault before 2. The anonymous call goes to the federal office by morning. During the confusion, Stefan gets him into the service elevator. 1 guard only. We finish him between floors. The city believes he ran because he talked. The words moved through Nadia like ice water. She saw it all at once. The fake security consultants, the vault, the planted money, the federal raid. Lucian Vale murdered in his own elevator and remembered as a coward who turned informant. It was elegant, cruel, and almost impossible to stop without turning the rooftop room into a battlefield. Nadia's mouth went dry. She placed another dessert in front of one of Tomasz's men and forced herself not to glance at Lucian. He was watching Stefan, not her. His expression had not changed, but something in his eyes had sharpened. He knew something was wrong. He could smell fear in the room, but he could not translate it. Stefan cleared his throat and turned back to Lucian. Mr. Radecki says he accepts your generous terms. As a gesture of trust, he invites you to inspect the vault tonight after midnight, privately. Only 1 guard each. He says it would honor the new partnership. One of Lucian's men shifted slightly. Lucian did not. He looked at Tomasz, then at Stefan, then at the untouched dessert plate waiting before him. Nadia knew the next few seconds would decide everything. If she spoke openly, Tomasz's guards would draw. Lucian's men would draw faster. Someone would hit the glass. Someone would die. Maybe everyone. Maybe her first. She had survived by staying out of rooms like this, and now the room had closed around her like a fist. Her eyes dropped to the dessert in front of Lucian. Dark chocolate surface, thin sugar crown, cherry glaze. A small gold knife rested beside the plate for cracking the sugar dome. Nadia moved, as if adjusting the presentation. Her back blocked the others for only a moment. With the tip of the tiny dessert knife, she scratched 3 words into the chocolate decoration beneath the sugar sculpture. Not deep, just enough. She turned the plate as she set it before Lucian. Interpreter, elevator, trap. Then she stepped back and lowered her gaze, every nerve in her body screaming. Lucian looked at the dessert. He did not blink. He did not stiffen. He did not glance at her in surprise. He simply picked up his spoon, cracked the sugar dome with a soft, beautiful sound, and let the broken pieces fall around the warning, like glass around a secret. For one long moment, Nadia thought he had not understood. Then Lucian placed the spoon down. "Stefan," he said calmly, "repeat the proposed agreement word for word." Stefan's face went shiny with sweat. "Of course, Mr. Vale." He lied again. Every sentence, every condition, every poisoned little promise. Lucian listened until the end. Then his dark eyes lifted and found Nadia across the table. The room seemed to narrow around that look. It was not the way men usually looked at her. Not dismissive, not polite, not amused by her size, not irritated by her presence. Lucian Vale looked at her as if the entire room had gone quiet, because he had finally discovered the only sound that mattered. "Miss Kowalska," he said, pronouncing her name with careful precision, though she had never introduced herself. "Is that translation accurate?" Nadia felt every eye turn toward her. Colin had once told her important guests did not like kitchen staff drawing attention. Management would hate this. Security would hate this. Tomasz would do worse than hate it. She thought of her mother's bakery, her father's old wooden counter, the threatening letters, the court witness from Krakow. Stefan's trembling hands, the way invisible people were always expected to carry the danger created by powerful men. And something inside Nadia, something tired and old and furious, finally refused to shrink. She lifted her chin and answered in Polish, her voice clear enough to reach every corner of the sealed room. If a man plans to murder someone, Tomasz, he should at least be brave enough to explain it without hiding behind a frightened interpreter. For half a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the rooftop dining room erupted. Tomasz shouted first. His chair crashed backward. His guards reached under their jackets. Lucian's lieutenant drew before they did, the movement clean and practiced. Nadia grabbed the dessert cart with both hands and slammed her weight against it, sending it skidding sideways into the doors just as two more men tried to force their way in from the hall. The heavy cart wedged against the entrance with a metallic scream. Silver domes flew, plates shattered. Sugar crowns broke across the floor like ice. Someone grabbed Nadia from behind. A thick arm locked around her chest, crushing the breath out of her. For one terrible second, she smelled tobacco and wool and the sharp bite of gun oil. She did not think. Thinking was too slow. She drove her heel down hard, but he held on. His hand reached for her throat. Nadia saw the metal serving stand lying beside the cart. She seized it with both hands and swung backward with every ounce of fear in her body. The edge cracked into the man's knee. He screamed and folded. Nadia twisted free, gasping, then drove the stand down again before he could grab her. She was not graceful. She was not trained. She was angry, heavy, and very hard to move when she decided not to be moved. A gunshot cracked through the room, deafening in the enclosed space. Glass burst somewhere near the bar. Lucian moved through the chaos like a shadow given purpose. He caught one attacker by the wrist, turned the weapon away, and struck him once in the throat. His face remained almost calm, and that frightened Nadia more than rage would have. She stumbled toward the wall panel near the service station. The rooftop room had a fire suppression system designed to protect the old hotel structure beneath it. She had listened to maintenance workers complain about it for months. Too sensitive, too cold, too expensive to reset. Her fingers found the manual release under the clear cover. She slammed her palm into it. The ceiling opened with a violent hiss. Freezing water and white vapor exploded downward. Steam swallowed the room. Men cursed in Polish and English. Shoes slipped on marble. Someone fired blindly and hit a chandelier. Crystal rained down like bright, deadly snow. Nadia crouched behind the overturned cart, soaked to the skin, chest heaving, her chef's coat clinging to her body. Through the white fog, Lucian's men moved with brutal certainty. Tomasz's guards had lost the advantage. One by one, they were forced down, disarmed, or dragged bleeding across the wet floor. Tomasz himself ended up on his knees with Lucian's hand locked around the back of his neck, his silver hair dripping water onto the marble. And Stefan, poor trembling Stefan, collapsed beside the table and began to sob. "I had no choice," he cried in English now, words breaking apart. "My daughter. He has my daughter. 16. He took her from school. He said if I did not bring you to the elevator, he would send her back in pieces." The violence in the room shifted. Even Lucian went still. Nadia pushed herself upright, water running down her face, sugar glass crunching beneath her shoes. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them against the cart. 16. A child. A frightened father, forced to lie with a gun pointed at his family from far away. Something clicked in her memory. Basement level. Two unfamiliar men. Hotel laundry bags too heavy for towels. One of them whispering in Polish near the old service corridor. She had noticed, because she noticed everything below the casino floor. People ignored kitchens, but kitchens saw the bones of every building. She turned toward Lucian. "The unused linen room near the south kitchen passage," she said, breathless. Two men carried hotel laundry bags through there before service. Too heavy, moving carefully. If they brought someone in without cameras, that's where she is. Lucian looked at her for only 1 second, but in that second something passed between them, sharp and irreversible. Then he turned to his lieutenant. Go. Men ran. The doors were forced open, the hallway filled with orders, footsteps, radio static. Nadia stood in the wreckage of the dining room, surrounded by broken dessert plates, bleeding criminals, and freezing water dripping from the ceiling. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold she was, how exposed, how deeply, terribly far she had stepped from the kitchen. Lucian released Tomasz to his men and walked toward her. Up close, he was taller than she expected, quieter too. There was blood on one cuff of his shirt, but his voice, when he spoke, was almost gentle. Why did you warn me? Nadia laughed once, though there was no humor in it. The sound came out tired and cracked. I don't know you well enough to care whether you live. One of his men looked offended. Lucian raised a hand, and the man fell silent. Nadia swallowed, her throat aching. But I know what it feels like to be used, because someone thinks you are disposable. I know what it feels like when powerful people expect invisible people to carry their sins. Stefan was afraid. I was supposed to be too unimportant to understand. Tomasz counted on both of those things. Lucian studied her for a long moment. No flattery, no smile, only that dark, unnerving focus. And were you afraid? Yes, Nadia said. I still am. Good, he said softly. Fear keeps honest people alive. Before she could answer, a radio crackled. Lucian's lieutenant's voice came through, low and urgent. We found the girl, alive, 2 guards down. She's scared, but she's breathing. Stefan broke down completely, weeping into his hands. Nadia closed her eyes. For the first time since entering the room, she let herself breathe all the way in. Lucian did not look away from her. In the ruined rooftop room of his own casino, with enemies bleeding on the marble and the city shining cold beyond the glass, Lucian Vale looked at Nadia Kowalska as if she had just become the most dangerous person he knew. Not because she had held a weapon, not because she had screamed louder than the men around her, but because she had listened, understood, waited, and chosen the exact moment to turn truth into a blade. Nadia felt that look settle over her like a warning. She had spent years hiding from organized crime, from courtrooms, from threats spoken in languages she wished she did not understand. She had buried her old life beneath buttercream, bread flour, and long hours. She had believed the kitchen could keep her safe if she stayed useful and unseen. But Lucian Vale had seen her now, and somewhere deep below them, beneath the casino lights and the river fog, Nadia understood with a soft, sinking fear that her invisible life had ended the moment he read those 3 words in chocolate. The invisible life Nadia Kowalska had built for herself ended quietly at first, not with applause, not with sirens, not with anyone thanking her in the ruined rooftop dining room, but with Lucian Vale removing his coat and placing it over her soaked shoulders, as if the whole room had disappeared, except for her. The coat was warm from his body and heavy with the scent of dark cedar, winter air, and something clean beneath the smoke of violence. Nadia stood still, while freezing water dripped from her hair and broken sugar melted under her shoes. Around them, men dragged Tomasz Radecki's guards across the marble floor. Stefan was still on his knees, crying into his hands as one of Lucian's men told him again that his daughter was alive. The city glittered beyond the glass, cold and beautiful, unaware that one of its most powerful men had almost died beside a plate of chocolate mousse. Lucian did not touch Nadia again after giving her the coat. Somehow that made the gesture more unsettling. He did not crowd her. He did not praise her with loud words meant for the room. He only stood close enough to block the worst of the wreckage from her view and said, "You need to come with me." Nadia let out a small, humorless breath. That sounds exactly like something a man says before I disappear forever. A few of his men looked at her as if she had lost her mind. No one spoke to Lucian Vale that way, especially not while enemy blood still marked his shirt cuff. But Lucian only studied her with that steady dark gaze that made silence feel like pressure. "If I wanted you gone," he said, "you would not hear me ask. That is not as comforting as you think it is." For the first time, something almost like amusement touched his mouth. It was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "No, I suppose not." He led her through the private corridor and away from the rooftop dining room. Nadia walked because her legs still worked, though she was not fully sure how. The hallway smelled of wet carpet and panic. Guards moved around them in controlled patterns, speaking into radios, locking down elevators, securing the casino floor before the chaos above could bleed into the public glitter below. When they reached a private office behind the rooftop bar, Lucian opened the door himself and let her enter first. The room was small compared to the dining hall, but warm. Dark wood shelves, a leather sofa, a desk with no clutter, a window overlooking the river. Lucian nodded to one of his men, who brought in a towel, dry clothes folded in a black garment bag, and a pair of soft slippers from the hotel spa. Nadia stared at the items as if they had been placed there for another woman. Lucian noticed. Of course he did. "Change if you want. No one will enter." Nadia clutched his coat tighter around herself. "And if I don't want, then don't." She hated that answer because it sounded like permission, and she had spent too much of her life mistrusting permission from powerful people. Still, the cold was digging deep into her bones. She waited until he stepped outside, then changed into the hotel robe and slippers, folding her wet chef's coat with shaking hands, though it was ruined. When Lucian returned, he had changed his own shirt. There was no blood now, no visible proof of what had happened upstairs. That made him look almost more dangerous, like violence was something his world could clean away in minutes. He placed a black card on the desk. "There is a car waiting to take you home. There is also a transfer prepared. Enough money for you to leave the city, pay your family's debts, and forget tonight." Nadia looked at the card, then at him. "Hush money, protection money. Those are cousins." His gaze sharpened, but his voice stayed calm. "You saved my life, Miss Kowalska. You also witnessed things men have been killed for seeing. I assumed that was the part where you killed me." "I do not kill people for being useful." Nadia laughed softly, but her throat ached around it. "That is also not as comforting as you think it is." Lucian walked to the window. Below them, the Crown Meridian continued shining. On the casino floor, people were still laughing, drinking, placing bets, and pretending money was harmless. "Why did you stop interpreting for the courts?" The question hit so close to old pain that Nadia's fingers curled into the sleeves of the robe. "Who told you that?" "No one. Your Polish is too formal when you choose it to be. Your English is too exact under stress. You heard not only what Tomasz said, but what he meant. That is training. I left because men like Tomasz do not like being understood." He turned from the window. "And yet you understood him anyway. I didn't do it for you." "I know." That answer made her look up. Lucian's face was quiet, but there was nothing dismissive in it. No smirk, no possessive little grin, only attention. Nadia swallowed. "I won't take your money." "You should." "No. I already have one man using money to control my family. I'm not trading him for another." Lucian went very still. "Who?" It was only one word, but the room seemed to lose warmth around it. Nadia knew that tone. It was not anger for show. It was a door opening to something dark. She should have lied. Instead, exhaustion made her honest. "A lender. My father borrowed from him before he died. The debt keeps changing. My mother's bakery is tied to it." "Name?" "No." His eyes narrowed. "Nadia?" The sound of her first name in his mouth should not have moved through her like that. It was soft, careful, almost dangerous because of how careful it was. She lifted her chin. I gave you a warning upstairs because a man was using an innocent father and an invisible worker as tools. Do not make me regret it by becoming another man who thinks my life is a file he can open. For a long moment, Lucian did not speak. Then he nodded once, slow and respectful. Fair. That surprised her more than if he had shouted. He sat across from her, leaving the desk between them like a treaty line. Then I will make a different offer. Work for me. Nadia stared at him. No, you have not heard the offer. I heard enough. You would be my interpreter and advisor, not a servant, not decoration. You would review foreign communications, sit in on negotiations, and tell me when someone is lying. Everyone in your world is lying. Exactly. I need someone who can tell me which lies matter. Nadia shook her head. I left courtrooms because of men like you. No. You left because the court used your voice, then left you exposed when the work became dangerous. The truth of it landed harder than she wanted. She looked away. Lucian leaned forward. Not much, just enough for his words to reach her without force. I will not pretend I am a good man. I am not. But I am not Tomasz. I do not want obedience from you. Obedience is easy to buy and easier to fake. I want judgment. I want nerve. I want the woman who warned me without firing a shot. Nadia's heart was still beating too fast. Her body was tired, her mind too awake. Part of her wanted to go back downstairs, put on a clean chef's coat, and pretend none of this had happened. But that life had already cracked. The kitchen had never truly protected her. It had only hidden her while men above and below the floors made decisions that shaped her future without asking her name. If I even considered this, she said slowly, I would have conditions. Lucian's mouth curved, not in mockery, but in interest. Good. I want a real salary, written, legal, taxes paid. I want protection for innocent casino employees. I want the authority to question any agreement I am asked to interpret. I want access to the original language of every document, not summaries filtered through men trying to make themselves look smart. I want the right to walk away. Yes. She blinked. You do not even know all the details. Yes, he repeated. To all of it. And my family stays out of your business. They will be protected from my business and from anyone who thinks hurting them will move you. Nadia studied him. Protected does not mean owned. No, Lucian said. It does not. By morning, everything had changed so neatly that it frightened her. Tomasz Radecki vanished from the Crown Meridian before sunrise. Not dead, not yet, but ruined. His surviving men were sent away with broken pride and clear instructions. Stefan and his daughter were moved to a safe place under false names. The casino opened on time. Management whispered about a kitchen accident on the rooftop level, then stopped whispering when Lucian's men walked past. Nadia went home at dawn in a black car that smelled of leather and silence. Her apartment felt smaller than it had the day before. The little kitchen, the cracked tile near the sink, the stack of bills on the counter. She stood in the middle of it all, wearing a hotel robe under Lucian's coat, and wondered how a life could look the same after it had already ended. At noon, her mother called crying. For one terrible second, Nadia thought the lender had come. Instead, her mother could barely speak through her tears. A lawyer had arrived at the bakery with papers. The loan had been purchased. The debt had been cleared. The deed was back in her mother's name, clean and free. There would be no more visits, no more fees, no more threats. Nadia knew who had done it before her mother said anything else. That evening, she found Lucian in his office above the casino floor. He was reading reports at a black marble desk while the city burned gold behind him. He looked up when she entered, but he did not seem surprised. You bought the loan, she said. Yes. I told you not to use money to control my life. I didn't. You erased my biggest problem without asking. I removed a knife from your mother's throat, he said quietly. What you do after that is yours." She wanted to be angry. Some part of her was. But beneath the anger was relief so large it frightened her more than debt ever had. Her mother was safe. The bakery was safe. Her father's name would not be taken from the window by a man with rings and threats. Nadia pressed her hands together. Gratitude is not surrender. "I know. And helping my family does not mean I belong to you." Lucian stood. "I do not need another person who belongs to me. I have enough of those. I need someone who can tell me when I am wrong and survive my reaction." "That sounds exhausting." "It will be." She looked at him for a long moment, at the controlled stillness, the lonely discipline, the violence held behind manners like a blade in velvet. "Then I want an office." This time, he really did smile. Small, brief, devastating. Done. Over the next month, Nadia entered Lucian Vale's world one room at a time. She did not transform all at once. Real change was stranger than that. It came in fittings with a tailor who did not sigh when measuring her hips. It came in suits, cut for her body instead of against it, deep black, soft cream, dark green, midnight blue. It came in shoes that let her stand firmly, instead of making her pretend pain was elegance. It came in the first meeting, where someone assumed she was there to bring coffee, and Lucian let the silence stretch until the man understood his mistake. At first, everyone looked at her. Then they looked away too quickly. Men who had known Lucian for years tried to decide what she was. Assistant, mistress, translator, charity case, mistake. Nadia saw the labels moving behind their eyes and learned not to answer any of them. She sat beside Lucian with a folder in front of her, listened to the room, and waited. Waiting had always been one of her most dangerous skills. She read contracts in Polish, Russian, French, and the strange broken English of men hiding bad faith behind good manners. She learned how casino power moved, not only through money, but through access. Who entered by the front door, who came through service passages, who sat near Lucian, who stood, who was offered wine and who was offered water. It was all language, different from court, different from kitchens, but language all the same. Lucian never finalized a foreign agreement without her review. At first, his men brought documents to him and ignored her. Then he would slide the papers across the table to Nadia and wait. Soon they started bringing the papers to her first. Her first true test came at an art auction held inside an abandoned railway terminal on the east side of the city. The building had been cleaned just enough to look expensive, while still feeling dangerous. Old tracks cut through the polished concrete. Massive windows rose into darkness. Paintings hung under temporary lights while men with private security details sipped champagne and pretended the artwork had clean histories. Lucian was there to negotiate transport with a group of smugglers who promised safe movement through Eastern Europe. They were charming men. Nadia distrusted charming men on principle. Their leader spoke English with soft confidence, but his eyes kept flicking to the shipping documents in a way that made Nadia's attention sharpen. When she reviewed the papers, she saw it. Not one mistake. A pattern. Customs stamps that looked right, until the pressure marks were examined. A copied signature from an official who had retired 3 years earlier. Routing numbers that would place Lucian's warehouses in the path of stolen artwork without ever showing his approval. Then she heard 2 of the smugglers speaking near a loading arch, quietly, laughing in Polish because they believed the heavy woman in the black suit was just another decoration from Lucian's side. They planned to swap the paintings with counterfeits, leave the originals in one of Lucian's warehouses, then let investigators discover enough evidence to blame him for the whole operation. Nadia felt the old fear rise, but it no longer controlled her hands. When the meeting resumed, she did not lean over and whisper to Lucian. She stood. The smugglers stopped talking. Lucian looked at her, then sat back, giving her the room without a word. Nadia laid the shipping documents on the table one by one. Her voice was calm as she named every forged stamp, every false route, every copied signature. Then she repeated their own plan back to them in Polish, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly enough that the charm drained from their faces. She ended by giving them a choice. They could honor the original agreement under Lucian's supervision, with every crate inspected by men Nadia selected, or they could leave the city without access to a single casino, warehouse, driver, buyer, or corrupt official under Lucian's reach. No one fired a shot. No one even raised a hand. The smugglers surrendered because Nadia had not merely exposed their lie. She had removed the shape of their escape. In the car afterward, Lucian sat beside her in silence for several blocks. Rain moved across the windows, turning city lights into long, trembling lines. Finally, he said, "You could have warned me privately." "I know. Why didn't you?" "Because they needed to learn I am not your shadow." Lucian turned his head toward her. His expression was unreadable, but his voice, when it came, was low. "No, you are not." Something changed between them after that. Not suddenly, not simply. Nadia was too practical to mistake danger for romance, and Lucian was too controlled to pretend tenderness came easily to him. But the space between them grew warmer. Their arguments became part of the work. She challenged his decisions when he moved too quickly toward punishment. He challenged her when she mistook caution for wisdom. Sometimes they fought in his office until midnight over one sentence in an agreement. Sometimes they sat in silence after, drinking coffee gone cold, both too stubborn to apologize first. He frightened her. He also listened. That was the part she had not expected. Men had desired Nadia before, quietly, awkwardly, sometimes in ways full of shame. Men had also dismissed her, mocked her, underestimated her, or wanted her hidden. Lucian did none of those things. When he looked at her, he saw too much. Her intelligence, her anger, her softness, her fear, her refusal to be grateful enough to become obedient. He watched her as if each truth only made her more valuable. One night, weeks after the railway terminal, she found him alone on the dark casino floor after closing. The machines were silent, the tables covered. Without the crowd, the Crown Meridian looked haunted, all gold and shadow. Lucian stood near a roulette table, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked tired, in a way he never allowed during the day. "Everyone around me wants something," he said before she could ask. "Money, protection, permission, forgiveness. They fear me, flatter me, or wait for me to weaken." Nadia stopped beside him. That is what happens when you build a life where fear is the front door. He looked at her, and instead of anger, there was something quieter. "And you?" "I want many things," she said, "but I do not want them badly enough to lie to you for them." His gaze dropped to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. "That is why you are dangerous." "No," she said softly. "That is why you trust me." The kiss, when it finally happened, was not stolen from chaos or forced by fear. It came slowly, almost carefully. Lucian lifted one hand to her face, giving her all the time in the world to step away. Nadia did not. His thumb brushed her cheek, and she felt the same steadiness that had unnerved her from the beginning. Not gentleness exactly. Lucian would never be a gentle man, but control, respect, restraint held like a promise. When his mouth touched hers, it was warm and deep, and quiet enough to feel like a secret the empty casino agreed to keep. Nadia's hand settled against his chest, feeling the slow force of his heartbeat beneath his shirt. She did not feel small in his arms. She did not feel hidden. She felt seen in a way that scared her because it asked her to stop disappearing. When they parted, Lucian rested his forehead lightly against hers. "I will not make you smaller," he said. Nadia closed her eyes. "I spent years doing that without help." "Not anymore." "No," she whispered. "Not anymore." By the time the final meeting came, the city had already learned to speak Nadia's name carefully. Men who once mistook her for staff now waited for her opinion. Women in the casino kitchens watched her cross the marble lobby in tailored suits and stood a little taller when she passed. Her mother's bakery reopened under a new sign, the old family name painted fresh across the window. Nadia still visited before sunrise sometimes, rolling dough beside her mother in silence, letting flour cover her expensive sleeves because some parts of herself did not need to be replaced to become powerful. The meeting was held in Lucian's private boardroom, a room with dark walls, long glass windows, and a table wide enough to make distance feel intentional. Leaders from 3 criminal crews had come to discuss a new network of cash routes, casino access, and political protection. They arrived with lawyers, guards, and the kind of smiles that meant everyone had already lied before sitting down. Nadia was delayed downstairs, reviewing a last-minute clause that one of the lawyers had tried to bury under harmless language. When Lucian entered the boardroom ahead of her, conversation stopped. Men stood. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Then Lucian noticed the chair beside his had been removed. His men had left space for Nadia to stand behind him. The room waited. No one else seemed to understand the mistake. Lucian looked at the empty place beside him, then at the nearest guard. His voice remained low, but every man in the room heard it. "Bring the chair back." The guard moved at once. No one spoke while the chair was returned. That silence said more than any speech could have. It told the room that Nadia's absence had been noticed. It told them her place was not behind Lucian, not against the wall, not waiting for permission to speak. Her place was at his right hand. When Nadia entered, she felt the silence before she saw the chair. She wore a black suit cut perfectly to her body, soft at the waist, strong at the shoulders, no apology in a single line of it. Her hair was pinned back. Her folder was tucked under one arm. She paused only long enough to understand what had happened. Lucian stood until she reached the table. That small act moved through the room like a threat. Nadia sat beside him and opened the agreement. She did not smile. She did not perform. She read the first page, then the second, then marked one paragraph with her pen. Only after she finished did Lucian turn to the assembled men. "This is Nadia Kowalska," he said. "She speaks with my full authority. No agreement is final until she has reviewed it. If you lie to me, you will first have to succeed in lying to her." Across the table, one man shifted in his seat. Another looked down at the documents as if they had become dangerous. Nadia felt their discomfort and let it settle. Once, rooms like this had made her want to vanish into walls. Once, she had survived by lowering her eyes and pretending not to understand languages that had almost destroyed her. Once, she had made sugar crowns for strangers who believed beauty had nothing to do with hands like hers. Now she sat at the center of the table, not because Lucian Vale had rescued her, not because he had dressed her in expensive clothes, not because he had cleared her family's debt, and not because danger had mistaken her for weak one winter night. She sat there because she had listened when men thought she could not hear, because she had spoken when silence would have been safer, and because she had proven that an empire built on fear was stronger when it made room for truth. Lucian's hand rested near hers on the table, not touching, not claiming, simply close. Nadia looked at the men across from her, then down at the agreement. There was another false clause hidden on page 4. She had seen it the moment she opened the folder. A slow calm moved through her. She lifted her pen. "Before anyone speaks," Nadia said, her voice steady and clear, "we are going to correct the first lie." Lucian's mouth curved faintly beside her, but he said nothing. He did not need to. The room had already understood. Nadia Kowalska was no longer the unseen woman beneath the casino floors, creating beautiful things for people who never learned her name. She was no longer hiding from the languages that had once brought danger to her door. She had crossed into Lucian Vale's world with open eyes, carrying fear, memory, intelligence, and a spine sharpened by every insult she had survived. And at the right hand of the most feared man in the city, she did not become powerful by becoming less herself. She became powerful by finally refusing to disappear. The black envelope was taped to Mara Whitaker's apartment door at the exact hour when Philadelphia felt least alive, when the hospital lights still burned across the city like pale stars, and the streets outside her building were slick with old rain. She had just finished a 12-hour night shift in the respiratory ward, her feet aching inside shoes that had lost their shape months ago, her scrubs carrying the faint, clean smell of oxygen tubing, latex gloves, and coffee gone cold in paper cups. All she wanted was 3 hours of sleep before she had to sit through class, then visit her grandmother, then return to work and pretend her body was not begging her to stop. But the envelope waited for her in the hallway, too dark and too still against the peeling beige paint, with her name written across the front in careful silver ink. Mara Whitaker. Not Miss Whitaker, not Mara. Her full name, neat and deliberate, like whoever had left it there had known exactly when she would come home, and exactly how tired she would be when she found it. For a long moment, she did not touch it. Mara stood under the flickering hallway light with her backpack slipping from one shoulder and the strap of her lunch bag cutting into her palm. Somewhere behind a nearby door, a television murmured softly. A baby coughed in the apartment below. The old radiator at the end of the hall knocked and hissed like something alive inside the wall. Nothing about the building was quiet enough for secrets, and yet the envelope made the whole place feel watched. Mara looked left, then right, half expecting to see someone standing by the stairwell, but the hall was empty. Only the black envelope remained, sealed with a small circle of wax the color of deep red wine. She almost laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because the whole thing was too dramatic for her life. Women like Mara did not get mysterious envelopes. They got overdue notices, hospital forms, tuition reminders, texts from landlords, and voicemails from billing departments that used soft voices to say cruel things. She got messages from nurses telling her that June had had another bad night. She got emails from the school reminding her that one more missed payment could pause her license program. She got grocery receipts that made her stand in the aisle doing math in her head until the numbers blurred. She did not get wax seals and silver ink. She did not get invitations from shadows. Still, her hand rose. The paper was thick and expensive, almost soft between her fingers. Inside was a single folded card, and nothing else. No money, no threat, no explanation that made any sense. Only a time, an address, and the name of a law office she had never heard of, printed beneath another name that made her stomach tighten, even though she had never met the man in person. Roman Calderon. Mara read it once, then again, slower the second time, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less dangerous. They did not. Roman Calderon was one of those names people in Philadelphia did not say loudly, unless they were either very brave or very stupid. Officially, he was the chairman of Calderon Logistics, a polished business empire that owned freight routes, private security contracts, construction firms, and nightclubs with velvet ropes outside the doors. Unofficially, if hospital gossip and city whispers were even half true, he controlled things no boardroom would ever admit existed. He was the kind of man whose picture appeared in business magazines beside careful words like influential and private, while everyone reading understood that careful words were often used when honest ones were too dangerous. Mara closed the card and looked at her own door, at the cheap brass lock, at the tiny crack near the frame where winter air always slipped through. For one strange second, she felt as if her ordinary life had become a room and someone powerful had just placed one hand on the handle from the other side. She should have thrown the envelope away. She knew that. A sensible woman would have ripped it in half, gone inside, bolted the door, and pretended she had never seen it. Mara was sensible. She was practical down to the bone. She had been practical since she was 9 years old and her parents never came home, since June took her in with a worn suitcase, a warm kitchen, and a voice that never once made pity sound like love. She had been practical through funeral bills, school forms, part-time jobs, asthma attacks, emergency rooms, and every quiet disappointment that taught her not to wait for rescue. Practical people did not answer invitations from men like Roman Calderon. But practical people also knew how much an oxygen concentrator cost. They knew the price of medication that helped someone breathe for one more month. They knew that advanced pulmonary fibrosis did not care how hard a granddaughter worked, how many night shifts she took, or how many meals she skipped so the woman who raised her could have the better soup from the hospital cafeteria. Practical people knew that love was not always enough. Sometimes love sat beside a hospital bed holding a hand and still could not buy time. Mara went inside her apartment and locked the door behind her. The apartment was small enough that the bed, kitchen table, and old sofa all seemed to be quietly arguing over the same little piece of floor. On the counter sat an unpaid electricity bill under a chipped mug. Beside it was her respiratory therapy textbook, open to a chapter she had been too tired to finish, the pages marked with a pen that had run out of ink. Her grandmother's picture leaned against the wall near the sink, June smiling at a church picnic years earlier, wearing a yellow blouse and holding 2 dominoes between her fingers, like she had just won a war. Mara set the black envelope beside that picture, and for some reason that made it feel even worse. June would have told her not to go. Mara could hear her voice clearly. Baby, the devil does not always knock with horns on. Sometimes he wears a good suit and offers help with both hands. June had a way of saying things like that while stirring soup, making warnings sound like recipes. But June was not in that kitchen. June was in a hospital room with thin blankets over her legs, waiting for lungs that might not come in time. June was trying to smile through the kind of breathing that made every sentence feel expensive. June had raised Mara after everyone else disappeared, and now Mara could not even afford the treatment that might keep her alive long enough to receive the transplant she had been promised. By noon, Mara had decided not to go. By 3, she had decided maybe she would only walk past the building. By 5, she had put on the only black dress she owned, then taken it off because it felt too much like trying. By 6, she was back in her scrubs, because scrubs were honest, and she had no interest in pretending to be softer, richer, or easier to impress than she was. By 7, she was standing outside a law office in Center City, staring up at windows that glowed gold against the evening sky, and wondering which part of her life had finally become desperate enough to bring her there. The attorney was a small, silver-haired woman named Evelyn Hart, who looked more like a retired judge than someone who worked for a man people feared. Her office smelled like lemon polish and old books. She did not waste time offering false warmth. She simply invited Mara to sit, placed a folder on the desk between them, and said that Mr. Calderon was prepared to make a legal proposal that would benefit both parties if Mara was willing to hear it in full before refusing. Mara looked at the folder, but did not touch it. "Why me?" she asked. Evelyn folded her hands. "Because you are not connected to any criminal family, political family, or business interest that could use the arrangement against him." Mara stared at her. "That is the worst answer I have ever heard." A faint smile passed across Evelyn's mouth, then vanished. "It may not become the worst before this meeting is over." That was the first moment Mara understood that the woman across from her did not expect her to be grateful. Somehow, that made the whole thing more frightening. Evelyn opened the folder. She spoke calmly, with no decoration, as if she were explaining a property sale or a contract dispute. Roman Calderon needed a wife, not a girlfriend, not a lover, not a romantic partner in the pretty way people used those words when they wanted to hide the sharp edges of an arrangement. A wife, a legal wife, a public wife, one who would stand beside him long enough to quiet the rumors that had been circling him since the car bombing 6 months earlier, one who would make the Ortega family understand that their daughter would not be entering the Calderon empire through a wedding ring, one who would look real enough that his own captain stopped wondering if pain had made him weak. Mara sat very still. She had heard about the bombing. Everyone had. The news said there had been an explosion beneath an SUV near the docks before sunrise. 1 dead, 1 injured, no arrests. The city had moved on by lunch, because cities were good at swallowing violence and pretending the streets had always been clean. But the whispers had stayed. Roman Calderon had survived, but not untouched. He walked with a cane now. Some days, people said, he used a wheelchair. Some said he was losing control. Some said men who once lowered their voices around him had started speaking louder. Now, apparently, he wanted Mara to help him convince the world he still held the room. Evelyn slid 1 document across the desk. The marriage would last 9 months. In exchange, Roman would create an independent medical trust for June Whittaker, large enough to cover experimental treatment, transplant costs, rehabilitation, medication, and long-term care. The trust would not be controlled by Mara or Roman once established. It would belong to June's survival, not Roman's mood. He would also pay Mara's rent debt, her school balance, her living costs during the arrangement, and a settlement at the end large enough that she could finish her license without begging the calendar for mercy. Mara listened to every word without blinking. Then she reached for the folder and saw the numbers. For a second, the room seemed to tilt. It was not just money. Money was too small a word for what sat on those pages. It was time. It was air in June's lungs. It was no more choosing between tuition and medication. It was no more smiling at nurses while wondering which bill could survive being ignored for another month. It was a house with working heat. It was groceries without counting. It was sleep. It was the wild, almost painful idea that her grandmother might live long enough to sit in the sun again and complain that Mara did not know how to play dominoes properly. Then Mara turned the page and saw how much Roman already knew about her. Her work schedule, her school balance, June's diagnosis, June's doctors, her rent history, her credit score, the date Mara's parents died, the name of the funeral home, the shift pattern she had taken at the hospital, the estimated amount she sent toward June's care every month. Mara slowly closed the folder. "No," she said. Evelyn did not seem surprised. "You are free to refuse." Mara stood, her chair scraping softly against the carpet. "That man had strangers dig through my life like I was a file in a cabinet, and now he wants to buy me because I'm useful and broke. Tell Mr. Calderon he needs a wife so badly he can marry one of the people already afraid of him." She walked out before Evelyn could answer. Outside, the city air was cold enough to bite. Mara made it 2 blocks before her phone rang. The hospital number appeared on the screen, and the anger inside her dropped so fast it left her hollow. June had suffered another respiratory crisis. She was stable now, the nurse said, but only after oxygen support was increased. The doctor wanted Mara to come in. There were decisions to discuss. Words like decline and limited window and bridge treatment moved through the phone in that careful medical tone Mara knew too well. The tone people used when hope was still present but had started packing its bags. Mara stood under the blue-white light of a pharmacy sign, with traffic hissing past her shoes, and pressed her free hand against her stomach. She did not cry. Crying took energy. She had learned to save energy for things that could still be changed. That night she sat beside June's hospital bed and watched her grandmother sleep. June's face looked smaller against the pillow, but even asleep, she held herself with that stubborn little dignity Mara had loved all her life. On the tray table sat a plastic cup of melting ice chips, a stack of medical forms, and a half-finished crossword puzzle. June had written one answer in block letters across the page: mercy. Mara stared at the word until it blurred. By morning, she called Evelyn Hart. She did not accept easily. She did not sound thankful. She returned to the law office with a notebook full of conditions written in blue pen, because Mara had never trusted anyone enough to walk into a trap empty-handed. June's trust would be permanent and independent before Mara signed a marriage license. Mara would keep attending classes. She would keep working in some capacity, because she was not going to become a kept object in a locked room. Roman Calderon would have no right to choose her clothes, change her body, monitor her friendships, touch her without permission, or make medical decisions for her. There would be separate rooms, separate finances, clear end terms, written protection. If he wanted a wife for public appearances, then that was what he would get. A public wife, not a doll, not a patient, not a hostage with a ring. Evelyn wrote it all down. Then, for the first time, Roman entered the room. Mara had expected someone loud. Men like him were supposed to fill spaces with voices, with perfume, with polished shoes and threats disguised as charm. Roman Calderon did not. He moved quietly through the doorway with a black cane in one hand and a measured stillness that made the room change shape around him. He was tall even with the slight guarded shift in his posture, broad-shouldered beneath a dark suit cut simply enough to make its expense feel almost invisible. His hair was black, touched with a little silver near the temples, and his face was handsome in a severe way, all controlled lines and watchful eyes. But what Mara noticed first was not his suit, or his cane, or the faint tension around his mouth when he stepped fully into the room. It was the way everyone else stopped breathing for half a second. Roman looked at Evelyn, then at the notebook in front of Mara, then finally at Mara herself. His gaze was steady and unreadable, but not careless. That surprised her more than it should have. "I hear you have conditions," he said. Mara leaned back in her chair. "I hear you have enemies." Something almost like amusement touched his eyes. "More than conditions. I can get more conditions. I believe that." His voice was low, calm, and tired in a way expensive clothes could not hide. Mara did not soften. She could not afford to. She read every condition aloud, one by one, refusing to lower her gaze. Roman listened without interrupting. Once, pain moved through his face so quickly she almost missed it, a small tightening around his jaw as he adjusted his weight near the chair. No one mentioned it. Mara saw that too. The silence around his body was not kindness. It was fear. When she finished, Roman placed one hand on the back of the chair across from her, but did not sit until a full breath later. The movement was controlled, but Mara had spent years watching people breathe through pain. She saw the careful timing of it. She saw the way he used stillness like armor. "I agree," he said. Mara narrowed her eyes. "That fast? You asked for control over your own life. That is not an unreasonable demand. Coming from a man who had me investigated." "Yes," Roman said. "Coming from him." The honesty was so plain that Mara had no answer ready for it. She disliked that. She disliked him. She disliked the room, the folder, the money, the way one signature could do what years of work had not. Most of all, she disliked the small, terrible feeling that he was not pretending to be better than he was. He knew exactly what kind of man he was. Maybe that was why the air around him felt so dangerous, not because he lied beautifully, but because he did not seem interested in lying at all. So Mara signed. The first payment entered June's trust before sunset. By the next evening, June's doctor had already received confirmation that the experimental treatment could begin. Mara cried in the hospital bathroom with one hand pressed over her mouth so no one would hear, then washed her face, and returned to June's room with a smile that fooled neither of them. June looked at her for a long time, eyes sharp despite the oxygen line under her nose. "What did you do, baby?" she whispered. Mara sat beside her and took her hand. "Something temporary." June's fingers tightened around hers. "Temporary things can still leave marks. I know. Did someone hurt you?" "No," Mara said. Then, after a pause, "But I think someone bought the chance to." June closed her eyes, not because she was asleep, but because she understood too much. 3 days later, Mara moved into Calderon House. It had once been a grand hotel near the river, back when wealthy travelers arrived with trunks and gloves and secrets tucked inside their coats. Now the building rose from the edge of the street like something from another century, its stone face washed clean, its tall windows dark and reflective, its entrance guarded by men who seemed to know the weight of every passing car. There were flowers outside in heavy planters, but even those looked disciplined. Nothing leaned, nothing wandered, nothing appeared by accident. Inside, the lobby had been restored with marble floors, brass railings, and a ceiling painted with faded clouds. It was beautiful, in a way that did not feel welcoming, too quiet, too polished, too aware of itself. Mara stepped in carrying 2 suitcases and a backpack, and every sound she made seemed too ordinary for the space. The wheels of her suitcase clicked across the marble. Her coat sleeve brushed against her hip. Her breath caught, then steadied. Men in dark suits watched without staring. Somewhere above her, an elevator opened with a soft chime. Roman was waiting near the old reception desk, seated in a wheelchair this time, one hand resting lightly on the armrest, and the other holding a phone he was not looking at. Mara saw the chair before she saw his face, and she also saw, in the corner of her eye, how 2 men nearby looked away too quickly, as if noticing his body was a mistake they did not want to be punished for making. Roman saw her notice. His expression did not change. "Your rooms are ready," he said. "My rooms," Mara repeated. "Yes, that sounds plural. It is. I asked for a private bedroom, not a museum wing. It is not a museum wing." She looked around at the lobby, then back at him. "Roman, this whole building looks like money got lonely and bought itself a castle." For 1 second, the men near the wall went very still. Roman stared at her. Then he gave the smallest laugh Mara had ever heard, barely more than breath, but real enough to make the silence around him crack. He turned his chair toward the elevator. "Come upstairs, Mara," he said, "before you insult the architecture again." She followed him across the lobby, her tired shoes moving over polished marble that probably cost more than every apartment she had ever lived in. The elevator doors closed behind them, shutting out the guards, the gold light, the watchful eyes, and the life she had known. Mara stood beside Roman in the mirrored silence, seeing both of them reflected back at her. The tired hospital worker with 2 suitcases, the feared man in the wheelchair with an empire waiting on his next breath, a bride who had not wanted to be bought, a groom who needed control more than air. Neither of them spoke as the elevator rose. But somewhere between the lobby and the private floor, Mara understood that this arrangement was not going to be as simple as a contract. Roman Calderon had opened a door because he needed a wife no one could control. What he did not yet understand was that the woman walking through it had survived her whole life by refusing to become easy for anyone to own. And in the quiet lift, climbing toward the heart of his fortress, with the city lights trembling beyond the glass, Mara felt the first soft touch of fear move through her. Not because Roman was powerful, and not because his world was dangerous, but because for the first time in years, she had stepped into a life where everything could change, and she had no idea yet whether that change would save her, break her, or teach them both the price of freedom. The elevator doors opened into a private floor that was quieter than any place Mara had ever lived, and that quiet unsettled her more than the guards in the lobby. It was not peaceful quiet. It was controlled quiet, the kind made by thick walls, hidden cameras, soft carpets, and people trained not to ask questions. Roman moved ahead of her without rushing, his wheelchair gliding over the dark wood floor, while Mara followed with her suitcases in both hands, refusing to let any of the men posted near the hall touch them. She had carried her own life this far. She was not about to hand it over at the door just because the building had chandeliers. Her apartment was larger than the entire place she had just left. There was a bedroom with cream-colored walls, a sitting room with tall windows facing the river, a bathroom with warm floors, and a small kitchen where every cabinet was already filled as if someone had studied what she bought and quietly multiplied it by 10. Mara stood in the middle of it all, feeling strangely angry at the softness of the bed, the folded towels, the fresh fruit on the counter, and the stack of new textbooks waiting on the desk. It was too much, too careful, too complete. Roman had given her everything she needed, and somehow that made the room feel less like a gift and more like proof that he had known exactly how much she had lacked. Roman watched her from the doorway. "If something is missing, tell Evelyn." Mara turned slowly. "Did you stock my kitchen based on my grocery receipts?" His face did not move. "Partly." "Partly," she repeated, and a sharp little laugh left her before she could stop it. "You understand that is not comforting, right?" "I understand it now." "No, you understand that I'm irritated. Those are not the same thing." For a moment, Roman said nothing. Then he nodded once, as if filing the sentence somewhere important. "Then explain it to me." That was how their marriage began. Not with flowers, music, or romance, but with Mara standing in a beautiful room she had not earned in any normal way, explaining to a feared man that comfort could still feel like a cage, if it came without choice. Roman listened. He did not apologize easily, and he did not soften his voice into fake sweetness, but he listened with an attention that made her feel, against her will, that every word she said had weight. The first weeks were not warm. They ate dinner together because his advisors said married people should be seen sharing meals, but Roman treated every dinner like a meeting with an agenda no one had printed. He asked what time she would be at the hospital, what time she would study, what time she would sleep, and whether she wanted security outside the classroom. Mara answered some questions and ignored others. When he told her that her schedule was inefficient, she told him that people were not shipping containers and could not be stacked according to convenience. When he sent a driver to take her to class without asking, she took the bus out of spite and came home soaked from rain, tired but satisfied. When he said the bus was unsafe, she said so was marrying a mafia boss, and yet here they were. The men in Roman's world did not know what to do with her. They were used to women who charmed, obeyed, negotiated, or feared. Mara did none of those things cleanly. She thanked people when she meant it. She snapped when they crowded her. She wore plain clothes to breakfast and did not apologize for the shape of her body, the tiredness under her eyes, or the fact that she still smelled faintly of hospital soap after long shifts. Some of Roman's advisors looked at her as if she were a temporary problem. Mara looked back as if she had treated patients with more frightening expressions and worse attitudes before sunrise. Roman was harder to understand. He was not kind in the way people usually meant kindness. He did not offer comfort with open hands. He fixed things, quietly, precisely, sometimes without permission. When Mara mentioned during a call that June's hospital television had not worked for 3 days, a new one appeared by the next morning. When she complained that low-income respiratory patients had to wait too long for equipment, the department suddenly received an anonymous donation large enough to buy machines, masks, tubing, and backup supplies. Mara knew it was him. Roman never admitted it. He only asked whether the equipment was sufficient, as if this were a weather report and not the most generous thing anyone had done for people who would never know his name. Then came the night in the closed restaurant. It was past midnight, and Mara had gone looking for tea because stress had made sleep impossible. She found Roman on the floor between 2 tables in the old hotel restaurant, one hand gripping the leg of a chair, his cane lying too far away, his face pale with pain. The room was dark, except for the river light coming through the tall windows. For 1 second, the sight shocked her. Not because he looked weak, but because he looked furious that weakness had found him alone. His eyes cut to her. Leave. Mara did not move. No. Mara. Roman. His jaw tightened. Sweat shone at his temple. His left leg was stretched at a bad angle, and his breathing was too shallow. Mara knew that breathing. She had heard it from patients in pain, patients in panic, patients trying so hard to control their bodies that they made the suffering worse. I said leave, he ground out. And I heard you. I'm still here. I do not need pity. Good. I did not bring any. That made him look at her. Really look. Mara lowered herself onto the floor several feet away, not close enough to touch him, not close enough to make him feel trapped. She folded her legs beneath her and kept her voice calm. She told him to breathe in slowly through his nose, then let the air out like he was trying to fog glass. He glared at her. She waited. Pain had a way of making pride louder before it made it useless. At last, Roman followed her breathing. Once, then again. His shoulders lowered by a fraction. Mara did not rush him. She did not call for help. She did not tell him he was brave. She simply stayed in the dark restaurant while the most controlled man in Philadelphia fought his own body one breath at a time. When he finally reached his chair and pulled himself back into it, his face was still pale, but his eyes had changed. You are not going to say anything? He asked. Mara stood and picked up his cane. She leaned it against the table within reach. Holding your breath makes pain worse. That is all? That is all. She left him there with his dignity, and something between them shifted so quietly that neither of them named it. After that, Roman stopped treating her presence like a problem to solve. He still watched everything, but the watching became less like surveillance, and more like care he did not know how to offer properly. He began joining Mara's video calls with June, at first sitting stiffly at the edge of the screen like a man attending court. June studied him with open suspicion. She asked him why he always looked like someone had offended him. Roman said most people did. June laughed so hard she coughed, and Mara almost threw him out of the call for making her grandmother wheeze. June did not trust him quickly, but she respected honesty when she saw it. She asked him if he loved Mara. Roman, to Mara's horror, said the marriage was complicated. June said all marriages were complicated, but that was not what she had asked. Roman looked at Mara then, and for the first time since the contract began, he seemed uncertain. I am learning what she will allow me to be, he said. June grew quiet after that. Then she told him to learn dominoes if he planned on joining family calls. Roman learned, badly. He lost every week, and June celebrated every victory like she had defeated an invading army. Mara would sit beside the screen with her study notes spread around her, watching Roman Calderon, feared by dock bosses and crooked politicians, frown at domino tiles, while her grandmother called him predictable. Those evenings became soft places in the middle of a hard life. But the world outside Calderon House did not soften. Mara began attending public events beside Roman, and every room taught her something ugly about wealth. People smiled at her mouth while judging her body with their eyes. They looked at her dress, her arms, her hips, her lack of polished ease, and tried to decide what Roman could possibly want with a woman like her. Mara felt it, but she did not shrink. She had spent too many years being treated as either invisible or too visible in the wrong ways. She knew how to keep her chin level. At a political fundraiser in a museum full of glass sculptures and people with expensive laughter, a society columnist leaned close enough for Mara to hear and said Roman had made an unexpected choice. The word hung in the air, sweetly poisoned. Mara turned, ready to answer, but Roman spoke first. Mara is the only person in this room whose approval matters to me. The woman's smile broke. By the next morning, her name had quietly vanished from every Calderon-sponsored guest list in the city. Mara was grateful for half a second. Then she was angry. "You do not get to speak for me," she told Roman when they were alone in the car. His gaze moved from the window to her face. "She insulted you." "Yes, and I had a mouth. I was defending you. You were controlling the room. There is a difference." Roman was silent for a long time. The city passed over his face in strips of light and shadow. "I am not good at the difference." "I know. I will learn." That was the first apology he gave her. Not perfect, not pretty, but real enough that Mara kept it. Their public wedding took place inside the restored ballroom of Calderon House. Roman's advisors wanted him to walk down the aisle. They wanted the cameras to see his cane, his posture, his proof of command. They wanted his body to become a message to every enemy watching. Roman listened to all of them, then rejected every suggestion. When the doors opened and Mara stepped into the ballroom, he was waiting at the front in a chair, with another chair beside him. No throne, no display, no forced performance. When Mara reached him, he looked up at her and said quietly, "I am tired of treating my body like evidence." So she sat beside him. They exchanged vows at eye level. The marriage was still contractual. The ring still had a deadline hidden inside it. But as Mara looked at him in the warm light of the ballroom, with his enemies watching from the edges and his own people trying to understand what kind of message this was, she felt something honest move through the lie. He was not standing over her. She was not standing beneath him. For once, no one in that room could pretend one of them was above the other. After the wedding, life became harder to categorize. Mara attended Roman's rehabilitation sessions, not as a nurse, not as a wife performing devotion, but as someone who understood breath, fatigue, recovery, and frustration. Roman helped her study for her licensing exam with the terrifying focus of a man preparing for war. He made flashcards, he timed practice tests, he asked questions in that low, serious voice until Mara threatened to throw a textbook at his head. In the abandoned restaurant, she studied at one table, while he conducted business at another, and sometimes the silence between them felt less like distance and more like trust. They began telling each other the things people usually hid, until love made hiding impossible. Mara told him what it was like to be a fat woman in rooms where strangers decided her story before she spoke. Weak, desperate, easy, grateful, invisible, too much, not enough. Roman listened without trying to correct her pain into something comfortable. Then he told her about his father, who had taught him that affection was leverage and fear was cleaner than love, because fear did not ask to be understood. He said every relationship in his life had been measured, tested, purchased, or defended. Mara looked at him then and felt the terrible loneliness beneath all his control. Their first kiss happened in the old restaurant after rain had turned the windows silver. Roman asked. He did not lean in and take. He asked in a voice roughened by restraint, and Mara, after one breath and then another, crossed the space herself. The kiss was quiet, careful, and nothing like the contract that had placed them in the same life. It did not feel bought. It felt chosen. For the first time, Mara wondered if the life growing between them could survive the end date written in their agreement. That hope lasted until the winter charity gala. Isabel Ortega found Mara near a balcony, beautiful and cold in a white dress that looked like moonlight turned sharp. She did not threaten. She did not raise her voice. She simply handed Mara a folder and said she deserved to know what kind of cage had been built before she stepped inside it. Mara opened it later in a locked bathroom stall. The report was not long, but it destroyed more than a longer one could have. 11 women had been investigated before Roman chose her. Financial records, family histories, hospital schedules, school debts, photographs, psychological notes, predictions. Mara read her own life turned into strategy. Her size, her limited dating history, her caregiving responsibilities, her exhaustion, her need for money, her loneliness, her pride. The report suggested that a woman like her would be likely to bond with a powerful man who offered protection without demanding immediate intimacy. It suggested that acceptance, attention, and financial rescue could create emotional dependence. Mara sat on the closed toilet lid with the folder shaking in her hands and felt every private moment sour at once. The apartment, the careful distance, the hospital donations, the public defense, the first kiss. Even his patience now looked like part of a plan someone had designed because they knew exactly where she was hurting. She confronted him on the rooftop garden, where winter wind moved through bare branches and the city below looked cold enough to break. Roman did not deny it. That was almost worse. He admitted he had authorized the investigation. He admitted his advisors had evaluated emotional compatibility. He admitted he had chosen her because she was honest, even when honesty cost her. But when Mara asked if he had used June's illness to make refusal almost impossible, he went silent. That silence answered everything. "I love you," he said finally, and his voice broke in a place Mara had never heard break before. The marriage began as strategy. My feelings did not. "I believe you," Mara whispered. Relief flickered in his eyes. Then she said, "That makes it worse, because real love did not erase manipulated consent. It did not clean the beginning just because the middle had become beautiful. He had found the locked door of her life, studied the hinges, and offered her the only key when someone she loved was dying on the other side." Mara left Calderon House that night. Roman did not stop her. He did not send guards to drag her back. He did not flood her phone with demands. He did not threaten her friend who gave her a couch to sleep on. Instead, he dissolved the marriage contract and signed over the full settlement immediately. He made June's medical trust permanent, with no condition attached to Mara, their marriage, or his access to either of them. He gave Mara the full investigation file, including information that could damage him if she ever chose to release it. Then he shut down the private intelligence division that had built the profiles in the first place. When his advisors warned him that vulnerability looked like weakness, Roman said vulnerability was only weakness to men who had never been brave enough to tell the truth. Weeks passed. Mara studied. She worked. She visited June. She cried in places where no one could see, and grew steadier in places where everyone could. She missed Roman in ways that made her angry. She missed his quiet, his attention, his terrible domino strategy, the way he looked at her like she was not a compromise but a force. But missing someone did not mean returning to the place where they had hurt you. Mara knew that now. Love without freedom was only a prettier kind of trap. Then the transplant call came during a winter storm. A match had been found for June. The lungs were available, but the weather had turned brutal. Roads closed, flights delayed. The hospital transport team could not reach the donor site in time. Mara stood in a hallway with a doctor speaking gently beside her, hearing the same sentence in different forms. They were trying. They were sorry. Time mattered. Roman heard through legal channels, not through Mara. He did not call her. He did not ask to come. He used the legitimate side of Calderon logistics. Every freight route, aviation contact, private hangar, and emergency clearance he could reach. He moved the lungs through the storm like the entire city existed for that one purpose. But every update went through Mara's attorney. Every signature stayed clean. Every act of help arrived without a demand attached. June survived the surgery. When Mara saw Roman outside the intensive care unit 2 days later, he was seated near the far wall, his cane resting against his chair, his face hollow with exhaustion. He did not stand when she came out. He did not speak first. He waited. Mara could have walked past him. A part of her almost did. Instead, she stopped and said, "She wants to see you." Roman looked up slowly. "Are you sure?" "No," Mara said. "But she is." Inside the room, June was weak, pale, and alive. Roman sat beside her bed and answered every question she asked. Not like a boss. Not like a husband trying to win back favor. Like a man who had decided the truth was the only gift he still had any right to offer. He admitted he had begun the relationship by taking away part of Mara's ability to choose freely. He admitted he had confused protection with control, because control was the only language he had been raised to trust. He said he loved Mara, but that love did not entitle him to another chance. June listened. Then she told him he was still terrible at dominoes. Roman closed his eyes for one brief second, and Mara laughed before she could stop herself. They did not fix everything that day. Real wounds did not close because someone finally said the right thing. They took months. Mara moved into her own apartment first. She finished school on her own terms. She set legal protections around her finances, her work, and her family. Roman respected every boundary, even the ones that hurt him. He continued leading his organization, but he began moving his legitimate businesses away from the violent structures his father had built. He could not erase his past, and Mara never pretended love made his crimes harmless. What changed was that he stopped asking her to live inside a lie so he could feel redeemed. Slowly, they rebuilt. Coffee after rehab, dominoes with June, quiet walks when Roman's leg allowed it, and quiet evenings when it did not. Mara passed her licensing exam. June grew strong enough to complain about hospital food with her full chest. Roman learned to use his cane and wheelchair without treating either as defeat. Mara learned that forgiveness was not forgetting the wound, but deciding whether the person who caused it had truly stopped holding the knife. 1 year after the original contract ended, Roman brought Mara to the rooftop garden at Calderon House. There were no guests, no advisors, no cameras, no family representatives, only the river, the evening sky, and a few early flowers pushing through the planters after a long winter. He gave her a ring, designed for her, not inherited from his family, and not chosen by committee. It was warm gold, simple and strong, with a stone that caught the last light without begging for attention. He did not take her hand until she offered it. "I am asking you to marry me," Roman said, "not to stop a war, not to protect my name, not to prove anything to my men, and not to repay a debt. I am asking because you are free to say no." Mara looked at him for a long time. She thought of the black envelope, the first elevator ride, the hospital bathroom where she had cried into her hands, the pain in the closed restaurant, the wedding chairs, the folder that broke her heart, the storm that saved June, the months of slow repair. She thought of every version of herself who had survived long enough to stand here without being owned by fear, money, or love. Then she smiled. "Yes," she said. Their second wedding was small. Mara chose her own dress and made no attempt to hide or shrink her body for anyone's comfort. Roman remained seated during the ceremony, and Mara sat beside him, the way they had once done for the wrong reasons and now did for the right ones. June cried openly, then ruined the tenderness of the reception by defeating them both at dominoes and accusing Roman of having no natural talent. Later, when the guests were gone and the hotel had settled into its deep nighttime quiet, Mara stood with Roman in the old restaurant where so much had changed. The tables were empty. The windows reflected the two of them side by side. Not savior and saved, not owner and bride, not a powerful man and the woman he had chosen because she was easy to corner. Just two people who had learned, painfully and slowly, that love only meant something when freedom was still standing beside it. Mara understood then that Roman's money had saved June, but it had not saved her. She had saved herself every time she demanded the truth, every time she refused to be grateful for a cage, every time she walked away from love when love forgot to leave the door open. And Roman, who had built his whole life around controlling every outcome before it could hurt him, finally understood that the most precious thing he had ever been given was the one thing he could never command. Mara took his hand. Roman held it gently, without possession, without pressure, and outside the windows, Philadelphia shimmered beneath the night like a city full of secrets, learning, slowly, how to breathe. The night Nora Bell was slapped in the middle of the Aurelia Crown Casino Hotel, the whole city learned a quiet truth it should have known much sooner. Some people only look powerless because the world has trained them to lower their eyes. Some kindness is so soft when it happens that no one claps for it, no one writes it down, no one even remembers the name of the person who gave it. But kindness has a strange way of coming back. Sometimes it returns wearing a black suit, carrying 7 years of gratitude and walking with the kind of calm that makes rich men forget how to breathe. The grand opening of the Aurelia Crown was supposed to be the most beautiful night of the year. Every newspaper had called it the new jewel of the city, a shining tower of gold glass and white stone, rising above the river like something built for people who never had to check their bank accounts before ordering dinner. Limousines lined the front entrance. Cameras flashed against the polished steps. Inside, under chandeliers shaped like falling stars, guests moved through the ballroom in waves of perfume, diamonds, velvet, and quiet judgment. The music was soft. The champagne was colder than rain. The laughter had that light, careless sound wealthy people made when they were surrounded by people paid to disappear. Nora Bell was very good at disappearing. She had been doing it most of her life. She was 30, fat, gentle, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Her black server uniform pulled a little tight at the arms, and the apron tied around her waist never sat the way it did on the thinner girls. She had learned to stop tugging at it because the more she tried to fix herself, the more people seemed to notice she believed something was wrong. So she kept her shoulders soft, her smile polite, and her hands steady around silver trays full of glasses that cost more than her weekly groceries. She moved carefully through the ballroom, offering red wine, white wine, sparkling water with lime, tiny crab cakes on porcelain spoons, and little squares of food with names she could not pronounce, but could balance perfectly while slipping between guests who never looked at her face. Sometimes they snapped their fingers. Sometimes they asked her to move before she was even standing near them. One woman leaned away when Nora passed, as if kindness and body weight were both contagious. A man with a watch bright enough to blind someone muttered that hotels were getting too relaxed with hiring standards. Nora heard him. Of course she heard him. People always seemed to say cruel things just loud enough for her to carry them home. She did not react. She never did. Reacting gave people a story, and people like that loved having a story where they were the victim of someone else's feelings. Nora had rent due on Friday. She had a mother's old medical bill still sitting in a drawer beside her bed. She had 2 pairs of work shoes, one with a cracked sole, and one that hurt so badly she saved them for emergencies. Pride was a beautiful thing, but groceries were more urgent. So she smiled, lowered her eyes, and kept serving. At the far end of the ballroom stood the Vale family, glowing beneath the attention as if they owned the light itself. Dominic Vale, tall and silver-haired, wore a tuxedo with the easy confidence of a man who believed every room was already his before he entered it. His wife stood beside him like a carved statue in pearls. Their daughter, Celeste, floated between donors and politicians in a pale designer gown that shimmered each time she moved. She was beautiful in a sharp way, the kind of beautiful that seemed to ask the world to apologize for not matching her. The Vale name was everywhere in the city: Vale Children's Hospital, the Vale Foundation, Vale Recovery Wing, Vale Scholarships, Vale Charity Galas, Vale Campaign Checks, Vale Emergency Clinics with gold letters on the doors and tired nurses behind them. People called them generous. People called them untouchable. Nora had served enough of their events to know those words did not always mean the same thing. The ballroom grew thicker as the mayor began moving toward the stage, and the crowd pressed closer to the center. Nora carried a tray of red wine toward a side table, careful with every step, when someone behind her pushed hard through the crowd. An elbow struck her shoulder, her ankle twisted. She tried to steady the tray, but the glasses slid together with a bright, terrible music. One glass tipped, then another, and red wine spilled across the marble floor in a dark splash that stopped just short of Celeste Vale's gown. For one breath, no one moved. Then Celeste turned. Her face changed before her voice did. The soft public smile vanished, and something colder stepped into its place. She looked down at the wine, then at Nora, then at the tray shaking in Nora's hands. The silence around them spread fast, rolling outward through the ballroom until even the music seemed to thin. "You have got to be kidding me," Celeste said, her voice low and sharp enough to cut ribbon. "Do you have any idea what you almost did?" "I'm so sorry," Nora said quickly. "Someone pushed into me. I didn't mean—" Celeste slapped her. The sound was not loud, but it landed everywhere. It bounced off the chandelier glass and the polished walls, and the open mouths of guests who had just remembered they were not supposed to look shocked when powerful people behaved exactly as powerful people often did. Nora's face turned with the force of it. Her cheek burned. The tray tilted from her numb fingers, and the remaining glasses fell, bursting across the floor in bright shards and red streams. Celeste stepped back, as if Nora's humiliation might stain her shoes. "You are disgusting," she said, louder now, letting the room hear every word. "Clumsy, careless, and completely unfit to be seen in a place like this. Who even hired you? This is an elite event, not some cafeteria." Nora's throat closed. Heat rushed up her neck and into her eyes, but she forced the tears back with a skill born from years of practice. Around her, hundreds of people stood frozen in expensive silence. A senator looked into his drink. A hospital board member suddenly became very interested in his cufflinks. A woman who had smiled at Nora for sparkling water 10 minutes earlier turned her head away, as if kindness might cost her something. "I'm sorry," Nora whispered again, though the words felt like stones in her mouth. "I'll clean it up." She lowered herself carefully to the floor, her knees pressing into the cold marble. Her cheek still burned. Her hands trembled as she reached for the broken glass. A small piece sliced her finger, and a dot of blood rose bright against her skin, mixing with the wine until she could not tell what was hers and what had only been spilled. She was aware of every stare, every hidden smirk, every person pretending not to witness her. She had spent her life being called too big, but in that moment she felt smaller than the broken stem of a glass beneath her palm. Then a shadow fell across the wine. The room changed before Nora looked up. It was not a sound exactly. It was the absence of comfort. The air tightened. Conversations died fully now, not because of embarrassment, but because a different kind of fear had entered the ballroom. Nora lifted her eyes and saw polished black shoes stop beside the broken glass. Above them stood a man in a dark suit, tall, broad-shouldered, and still in a way that made stillness feel dangerous. Luca Moretti. Even Nora knew the name. Everyone did. People whispered it in hotel kitchens and back offices and late-night diners where men in private security jackets came in after midnight with bruised knuckles and paid in cash. Luca Moretti owned ports that never slept, nightclubs with hidden doors, security companies with clean uniforms and dirty secrets. Businessmen feared his calls. Politicians accepted his donations and pretended not to know the source. Criminals lowered their voices when they said his name. He was not loud. Men like him never needed to be. Nora expected him to step around her. Instead, Luca Moretti knelt. The sound that moved through the ballroom was not a gasp, not exactly. It was softer than that, stranger, like hundreds of people had all forgotten how the world worked at the same time. Luca did not seem to care. He lowered himself beside Nora on the marble floor, careful not to crowd her, and picked up the broken half of her name tag from where it had fallen near the wine. The little plastic badge had cracked across the middle, splitting her name into two pieces. Nora stared at him, too stunned to speak. Luca held the badge gently, as if it mattered. His hands were large, clean, and steady, but there were faint scars across the knuckles. He took the other half from near her knee, fitted the pieces together, and looked at the name. Nora Bell, he said quietly. No one had ever made her name sound like that, like it was not just something printed on cheap plastic, but something remembered. I can fix that later, Nora whispered, embarrassed all over again. You don't have to. I know, Luca said. His voice was low, calm, and warm, in a way that made the fear around him feel even stranger. But I want to. He reached toward her uniform, then paused before touching her. It was such a small thing, that pause, but it nearly broke her. He was asking without asking. Nora gave the smallest nod. Luca pinned the broken name tag back near her heart with careful fingers, making sure the cracked edge sat flat and did not poke through the fabric. He did not rush. He did not laugh. He did not act like helping her lowered him in any way. Then he stood. The gentleness left his face slowly, like a door closing. He turned to Celeste Vale. You owe her an apology, Luca said. Celeste blinked once, then let out a bright, disbelieving laugh. Excuse me? You heard me. A nervous shift moved through the guests. Dominic Vale stepped forward slightly, his smile tight. Luca, I'm sure this is just an unfortunate little misunderstanding. My daughter was startled. The server made a mistake. The server was shoved, Luca said without looking at him. Your daughter chose cruelty. Celeste's face flushed. She looked around the room, expecting support, and found plenty of people willing to watch, but none willing to speak. Her chin lifted. I'm not apologizing to a waitress who almost ruined a couture gown. I don't know what kind of point you're trying to make, Mr. Moretti, but my family has done more for this city than most people in this room combined. Yes, Luca said. That is what makes this worse. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Celeste's eyes narrowed. Why do you even care? Look at her. Something changed in Luca's expression then. It was small, but Nora felt it like a match struck in the dark. His gaze shifted from Celeste to her, and for a moment the whole room vanished from his face. Because I have been looking for her for 7 years, he said. Nora's breath caught. The silence that followed was deeper than the first one. It had no mockery in it now, only confusion and a sudden hungry curiosity. Celeste frowned. Dominic's polished smile slipped. Nora stared at Luca, as if he had started speaking in a language only her heart recognized. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I think you have the wrong person." "I don't." Luca turned toward her fully. 7 years ago, after the storm, the old South Bridge collapsed. My younger brother was pulled from the wreckage barely alive. He needed blood the hospital did not have enough of. Rare type. Too rare. People were calling other hospitals, other cities, anyone they could reach. Then a woman came in from the emergency waiting room. She donated once, stayed when they told her it still might not be enough, and donated again after the doctor warned her she could faint. Nora's face went cold. The memory did not return all at once. It came in pieces. Rainwater on her shoes. Fluorescent hospital lights. A boy's hand gripping hers so tightly her fingers ached. His face pale beneath a clear mask. Her own voice, soft and shaking, telling him to stay. Luca stepped closer, but not too close. She sat beside him before surgery, because our family had not arrived yet. She told him he was not alone. Then she left before anyone could thank her. She gave a false phone number at the front desk because she didn't want attention, but my brother remembered her voice. A young man moved forward from behind one of Luca's security men. He was thinner than Luca, with the same dark eyes, though his held more light. He walked with a slight stiffness in one leg, but he came steadily, staring at Nora with growing wonder. "Nora?" he asked. Her hand rose to her mouth. The young man smiled, and his eyes shone. "It is you. I knew it when I heard you say you were sorry. I remember your voice." He swallowed hard. "You kept telling me, 'Stay with us. You are not alone.' I was scared, but I held on to that. I held on to you." Nora could not stop the tears this time. They slipped down her cheeks, warm over the place Celeste had struck. She had not thought of that night in years. Not because it meant nothing, but because she had never done it for memory. A boy had needed help. She had the right blood, that was all. There had been no music, no cameras, no applause. Just a hospital hallway, a scared child, and a choice that had felt too simple to be called heroic. Luca looked at the room, and his voice became quiet enough that everyone leaned in to hear it. "My brother is alive because of Nora Bell." The guests looked at Nora differently then. Not kindly, not yet, but differently, as if a curtain had been pulled back and they were embarrassed by what they had failed to see. Celeste's mouth parted, but no words came out. Dominic Vale stared at Nora with an expression too careful to be shock and too pale to be anger. Luca reached into his jacket and took out a small black card. He placed it gently on Nora's tray, which now sat empty and trembling in her hands. "My private number," he said. "If anyone threatens you after tonight, calls you, follows you, or makes you feel unsafe, you call me. No hesitation." Nora looked down at the card. It felt heavier than it should have. "I don't want trouble," she whispered. Luca's eyes softened. "I know. Trouble often wants people who never asked for it." That was the last thing he said before stepping back. The hotel manager rushed in, pale and sweating, suddenly eager to help Nora stand, suddenly full of apologies he had not found in himself 2 minutes earlier. Nora barely heard him. She moved through the rest of the evening like someone walking underwater. The ballroom returned to its music, but not fully. Something had cracked. Not just her name tag, not just the clean surface of the event. Something larger and hidden beneath all that gold had shifted. Later, in the employee locker room, Nora sat on a bench with an ice pack against her cheek, and Luca Moretti's card folded inside her palm. Her friend Maya stood in front of her, twisting her hands, her eyes red with guilt. "I should have said something," Maya whispered. "When Celeste hit you, I wanted to, I swear I did. But the Vales, Nora, people who cross them lose jobs. They lose apartments. They get blacklisted. I got scared." Nora was too tired to be angry. Everyone was scared. Maya looked toward the locker room door, then lowered her voice. "There's more." Nora lifted her eyes. Maya opened her bag and pulled out a thin folder, then a small flash drive. Her hands shook as she placed them beside Nora on the bench. I copied these from the internal system. Payroll notes, medical benefit denials, employee reviews that were changed after injuries. The Vail Foundation has been forcing people out before they can claim coverage. Older workers, sick workers, disabled workers, plus-size staff, they said, didn't fit the brand. And that's not even the worst part. Money that was supposed to go to low-income patients got moved into shell companies. Nora stared at the folder. Her cheek throbbed. Her cut finger stung. The night felt suddenly much larger than one slap. "Maya," she said carefully, "why are you giving this to me?" "Because you're honest," Maya said. "Because people saw what happened tonight. Because Luca Moretti saw you. And because I think the Vails are finally scared of someone they can't buy." Nora wanted to push the folder away. She wanted to go home, take off her uniform, make tea, and forget the feeling of hundreds of eyes watching her kneel in spilled wine. She was not brave in the way people in movies were brave. She did not want enemies. She did not want cameras. She did not want to be the center of anything. But when she looked at the names in the folder, she saw people who had been made invisible just like her. People who had cleaned rooms, carried trays, lifted patients, filed charts, answered phones, and trusted powerful people to treat them like humans. She took the folder. The service hallway was almost empty when Nora finally left after midnight. The casino still glowed above her, but down here, everything was concrete, pipes, humming vents, and tired shadows. She held her bag close under one arm, the folder pressed against her side like a secret with a heartbeat. She reached the freight elevator and stepped inside, too exhausted to take the stairs. The doors slid shut. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lights flickered. Nora looked up. The elevator jerked hard enough to throw her against the wall. Her bag fell. The folder slipped across the floor. Somewhere above her, metal groaned. The emergency lights went out, and darkness swallowed the little box whole. Nora's breath broke in her chest. She slapped the button panel. Once, twice, again and again. But nothing answered. Then the elevator dropped. It fell only a few floors, but it felt like forever. When it stopped, the impact slammed her to her knees. Pain shot through her legs. The air went thin and hot. She could hear her own breathing, loud and ragged in the dark. Somewhere outside the elevator, beyond the sealed doors, there was a faint sound. Not machinery, not pipes. Footsteps. Nora reached blindly across the floor until her fingers found her bag. Then the folder. Then the black card Luca had given her. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She could not see the numbers, but her thumb found the raised edge of the card, and for the first time that night, she understood that what had happened in the ballroom had not ended when the music started again. The Vails were not afraid of being embarrassed. They were afraid of being exposed. And as the footsteps stopped outside the elevator doors, Nora Bell held her breath in the dark and prayed that kindness really did come back when it was needed most. The footsteps stopped outside the elevator doors, and for one long breath, Nora Bell forgot how to move. The darkness pressed against her face like a hand. Her knees ached from the fall. Her cheek still burned from Celeste Vail's slap, and somewhere in the small black space around her, the folder of copied files rested against her side like a secret too heavy for one person to carry. She held Luca Moretti's card between trembling fingers. Though she could not see the numbers on it, she could only feel the sharp edge of it, smooth and cold, a tiny piece of promise in the middle of all that fear. A voice came from the other side of the doors. It was low, muffled by metal, and not one she knew. Inside, Nora stopped breathing. Another voice answered, closer this time. Make sure she doesn't walk out with anything. The words were simple, but they made the dark feel alive. Nora pulled her bag against her chest and backed into the corner of the elevator. There was nowhere to run. The emergency button was dead. Her phone had cracked when she fell. The screen dark, no matter how many times she pressed it. The air smelled like dust, oil, and burned wires. Above her, the ceiling panel gave a soft, ugly creak. Then a new sound came from far away in the service hallway. It was not hurried. It was not unsure. It was the steady rhythm of men who knew exactly where they were going. The voices outside the elevator went quiet. Nora heard a sharp movement, then a curse, then the heavy sound of someone hitting the wall. A second later, someone shouted, but the shout ended too fast. There was a low thud, then another, then silence. Nora clutched the folder and squeezed her eyes shut even though the dark was already complete. She did not know whether to call for help or hide from it. Then Luca's voice cut through the metal. Nora. Her whole body went weak with relief. I'm here, she called, but her voice broke on the words. I'm in here. Step back from the doors, Luca said. His calm was still there, but something hard lived beneath it now. As far back as you can. Nora dragged herself away from the doors. A moment later, something heavy struck the outside of the elevator. Metal screamed. Light spilled through a thin opening, then widened as strong hands forced the doors apart. Luca stood in the gap, his black suit jacket gone, his white shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. Behind him, two of his men held the service hallway, while another worked at the damaged controls. One man lay on the floor near the wall, groaning softly. Another sat with his hands tied behind his back, his face pale with the kind of fear that came from suddenly understanding he had chosen the wrong woman to corner. Luca did not look at them. He looked only at Nora. The moment the doors opened wide enough, he stepped in and lowered himself in front of her. He did not grab her. He did not bark orders. He took in her shaking hands, the dust on her uniform, the small tear in her sleeve, the folder pressed so hard against her chest that the paper edges had bent. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Nora tried to answer, but the words would not come. She shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again, ashamed of her own confusion. Luca's face softened. "You're safe now." That was when she started crying, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet breaking, the kind that came after someone had held herself together for too long. Luca reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he took her hand and helped her up. Her legs trembled beneath her, and he steadied her with one arm, strong but careful, as if she were not weak, only wounded. "They were waiting for me," Nora whispered. "They wanted the files." Luca's eyes dropped to the folder. Then he looked toward the men in the hallway, and his expression changed in a way that made the air colder. "Yes," he said, "that means the files are real." Nora followed him out of the elevator. The hallway looked different now, brighter under the harsh service lights, but no less frightening. One of Luca's men handed him a phone. Luca listened for a few seconds, his jaw still, his eyes unreadable. "Lock down the loading docks," he said. "Pull the camera feeds before hotel security erases anything. I want the elevator controls, employee access logs, and every name attached to tonight's maintenance override." Quietly, he ended the call and turned back to Nora. "I can take you home, or I can take you somewhere safe while we find out who sent them." Nora looked down at the folder in her hands. A few hours ago, she would have chosen home. She would have chosen her tiny apartment, her chipped mug, her soft blanket on the couch, and the familiar comfort of pretending the world was not as cruel as it had proved itself to be. But now home did not feel untouched. If the Veils could lock her inside an elevator beneath a hotel full of witnesses, they could find her anywhere. "What happens to Maya?" she asked. Luca watched her for a moment, and something like respect moved across his face. "I already sent someone to bring her in safely." Nora exhaled. "And the files?" "We make copies. We verify them, then we put them somewhere the Veils can't bury." She looked up at him, afraid of the answer before she asked the question. "Are you going to hurt them?" Luca was quiet for a moment. Around them, his men shifted, listening without looking, like they were listening. "No," he said at last, Not the way people expect me to. Nora searched his face. Luca's voice lowered. A family like the Vales is built on clean hands in public and dirty work in private. If I answer them with fear, they will use that fear to call themselves victims. They will hide behind hospitals, children, charity, and every smiling picture they ever paid a photographer to take. His gaze moved to the broken name tag still pinned to her uniform. So we do this with proof. We pull up the floorboards and let the whole city see what they built underneath. The safe place was not a mansion, not a hidden nightclub, not the kind of place Nora imagined a man like Luca would use. It was a quiet law office on the top floor of an old stone building downtown, with warm lights, locked elevators, and conference rooms full of people who looked too tired to be easily frightened. There were lawyers in rolled-up sleeves, accountants with red eyes, investigators with coffee cups, and one older woman named Ruth, who spoke to Nora with the steady kindness of a nurse taking blood pressure. Maya was already there, wrapped in a gray blanket, crying into a paper cup of tea. When she saw Nora, she ran to her and hugged her hard. "I'm sorry," Maya sobbed. "I should never have dragged you into this." Nora held her, feeling the other woman shake. "You didn't. They did." For the rest of the night, the room filled with quiet movement. The files were scanned, copied, stored, and sent through channels Nora did not understand. Maya explained where she had found them. A forensic accountant traced shell companies hidden beneath names that sounded harmless, like wellness groups and care partnerships. A former investigator from the Attorney General's office made calls with his back to the window. Someone found the altered resignation letters. Someone else found patient fund transfers that had been split and moved until the money looked like it had vanished into fog. By dawn, the story had changed. It was no longer about a wealthy daughter slapping a banquet server. It was about workers pushed out before surgery, janitors denied injury claims, nursing aides fired after cancer diagnoses, older employees marked as performance risks, and charity funds meant for struggling patients redirected into private accounts tied to the Vale family. Every new document seemed to open a deeper room inside the same dark house. Nora sat at the conference table with a blanket around her shoulders. She felt small again, but differently now. Not worthless, just human. Human enough to be scared. Human enough to wish someone else could carry the truth for her. Luca sat across from her, silent while the lawyers worked. He did not crowd her. He did not try to turn her fear into romance or bravery. He simply stayed. Every so often, when the room grew too loud, Nora found herself looking at him, and each time, he was already watching her with that same calm focus from the ballroom. Not like she was a problem, not like she was a burden, like she mattered. Near sunrise, Ruth placed a cup of coffee in front of Nora and sat beside her. "You understand what happens next?" Ruth asked gently. Nora looked at the stacks of paper. "Not really. That's all right. The short version is that we protect the evidence first. Then we protect the people. Luca's team can help keep you safe, but this can't just be his fight. It has to become public in the right way, through the courts, through investigators, through reporters who won't scare off when the Vale name shows up." Nora rubbed her thumb over the edge of the coffee cup. "I'm not the kind of person who speaks in public. Most people who tell the truth aren't," Ruth said. "That's why it matters when they do." The days that followed blurred together. Nora did not return to her apartment alone. Luca's people brought her clothes, her old photos, her mother's chipped blue vase, and the little tin where she kept spare buttons and emergency cash. Maya stayed in a safe apartment nearby. Former employees were contacted quietly. Some hung up, some cried. Some said they had waited years for someone to believe them. One woman had lost her job after a warehouse injury and never received the medical coverage she had been promised. One man had been forced to sign resignation papers while his wife was in the hospital. A nurse had kept copies of patient transfer records because she always believed something was wrong, but she had been too afraid to stand alone. Now, one by one, They stopped standing alone. The Vale family moved quickly too. By the third day, Celeste had posted a polished statement online, saying she deeply regretted an unfortunate interaction with hotel staff, but would not allow false rumors to distract from her family's decades of service. Dominic Vale appeared on morning television with soft eyes and a serious voice, calling the claims a coordinated attack on charity itself. He said the foundation welcomed transparency. He said people were trying to punish success. He said the city should be careful before believing bitter employees and outside agitators. He never said Nora's name. That hurt more than she expected. The slap had made her visible for one awful moment, but Dominic's denial tried to erase her all over again. She watched the interview from Luca's office, sitting on a couch too expensive for her to feel comfortable on, wearing a simple sweater and holding her repaired name tag in her palm. Luca turned the television off. "He thinks silence can still save him," he said. Nora looked at the dark screen. "Maybe it can. People believe families like his." For a while, she turned to him, and then Luca came to stand near the window. Morning light cut across his face, softening nothing. "Then we give them something stronger to believe." The press conference was announced for Friday at the Aurelia Crown, in the same ballroom where Nora had been slapped. The Vale family framed it as a public accountability event. Reporters were invited, donors were invited, hospital board members, hotel executives, city officials, and foundation lawyers all arrived beneath the same chandeliers that had watched Nora kneel in spilled wine. Celeste came dressed in ivory, calm and perfect, her hair smooth, her smile practiced. Dominic Vale stood near the stage, speaking softly with his attorneys, looking every inch the generous king of a city that had not yet realized his crown was made of paper. Nora stood in a private hallway outside the ballroom, unable to make her feet move. She was not in her server uniform this time. Ruth had helped her choose a simple dark dress, soft at the waist and comfortable at the arms. It did not hide her body. It did not ask forgiveness for it. Her repaired name tag was pinned near her heart, not because anyone required it, but because she wanted to remember who she had been when everyone looked away. Luca waited beside her. He wore a dark suit and no expression people could easily read. "I'm scared," Nora admitted. "I know. I keep thinking I'll walk in there and they'll all see the same thing they saw before." Luca turned toward her. "And what was that?" She swallowed. "A fat server who didn't belong." For the first time that morning, anger showed in his eyes, but his voice stayed gentle. "Then let them look closer." Nora breathed in slowly. Somewhere behind the ballroom doors, cameras clicked and voices rose. Her hands were cold. Luca offered his arm, but he did not take her hand until she chose to place it there. When the doors opened, the sound shifted like a tide pulling back. People turned. Reporters lifted cameras. Celeste's smile froze. Dominic Vale stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. Luca entered first, but he did not step ahead of Nora for long. He slowed, matching her pace, letting the room see them together. Nora felt every stare land on her body, her dress, her name tag, her face. Her heart pounded so hard she wondered if the cameras could hear it. But she kept walking. This time she did not lower her eyes. Dominic recovered first. "Mr. Moretti," he said smoothly, though his face had gone pale beneath the lights. "This is a private foundation matter." "No," Luca said. "It isn't." Before Dominic could answer, the ballroom doors opened again. A group of federal investigators entered with a judge, 2 court officers, and several people carrying sealed folders. The room erupted in whispers. The judge's voice cut through the noise, calm and clear. Preservation orders had been issued for Vale Foundation records, hospital files, payroll systems, private devices, donor accounts, and all related shell companies. No documents were to be deleted, moved, altered, or destroyed. For the first time, Dominic Vale looked afraid. Celeste stepped forward, eyes wide. "This is insane. You can't just storm into our event because some waitress wants attention." Nora flinched, but only inside. Maya came through the doors next. She held the copied files in both hands. Behind her came former workers, not all at once, but one after another, until the back of the ballroom filled with faces no gala photographer had ever cared to capture. A housekeeper with a cane, a former nurse with tired eyes, a kitchen worker whose hands twisted nervously around his hat, a woman who had once worked payroll and now held a folder of her own. Then the former Human Resources Director of the Vale Foundation entered, escorted by 2 attorneys. She was shaking, but she walked straight to the judge and handed over original documents. The reporters surged forward. Dominic's attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Celeste's perfect face cracked with panic. "They're lying," she said. "All of them. They want money. They want fame. This is what people do when they're jealous." Nora listened to her voice echo through the ballroom, and something quiet settled inside her. Celeste sounded loud, but not strong. Nora had mistaken loudness for strength many times. She had mistaken beauty for worth, money for goodness, silence for peace. But now, standing in the room where she had once knelt, she finally understood that cruelty often shouted because it was terrified of being answered. Ruth touched Nora's shoulder. "You don't have to speak unless you're ready." Nora looked at the former employees. She looked at Maya. She looked at Enzo, standing near Luca's men at the side of the room, his eyes bright with the same memory that had brought Luca to her. Then she looked at Celeste, who had slapped her not because of spilled wine, but because she believed Nora was someone the world would allow her to hurt. Nora stepped forward. The microphones found her before she found her voice. For a second, she saw nothing but glass, lights, and faces. Then she touched the cracked name tag near her heart. "My name is Nora Bell," she said. The room quieted. "I was working here on opening night, when Celeste Vale slapped me in this ballroom. I did not come here today because of that slap. I did not ask for this because I wanted revenge. I came because after that happened, people started showing me records, names, injuries, lost jobs, medical care denied. Charity money moved away from the people who needed it." Celeste folded her arms, but she said nothing now. Nora's voice trembled, but it did not break. "I know what it feels like to be treated like you are easy to ignore. I know what it feels like when people think your body makes you less worthy of respect. But this is bigger than me. This is about every worker who was told to be quiet because a powerful name was more important than their pain. It is about patients who trusted a charity and were used instead. It is about people being treated as disposable." She looked at Celeste then, not with hatred. That surprised her most of all. "I accept an apology when it comes with truth," Nora said, "not when it is used to hide more harm." The ballroom erupted. Questions flew from reporters. Cameras flashed so fast, the light seemed almost white. Dominic Vale tried to leave, but investigators stopped him near the side exit. His wife sat down as if her legs had lost strength. Celeste stood alone at the front of the room, her beauty still perfect and suddenly useless. In the days after that, the Vale name fell piece by piece. Accounts were frozen. Executives resigned. Several took deals before the first hearing even began. Dominic Vale was charged with fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy tied to the foundation's finances. Hospital records were opened. Compensation funds were created for former workers and harmed patients. The city that had once praised the Vales began removing their name from buildings, scholarships, and hospital wings. Their portraits came down from polished walls. Their speeches vanished from charity websites. People who had whispered for years finally spoke in full voices. Celeste's apology came 2 weeks later, under legal pressure and public shame, in front of the same hotel entrance where cameras had once adored her. She looked smaller without the room protecting her. "I apologize to Nora Bell," she said, each word stiff and painful, and to the workers and families harmed by my family's actions. Nora watched from a few feet away. She did not smile. She did not gloat. Revenge, she realized, was not the warm thing people imagined. It did not heal the first wound. It did not erase the slap or the years of being overlooked. But justice was different. Justice made space for air to come back into the room. "I accept your apology," Nora said. "But I hope you understand this was never only about me." Celeste looked at her then, really looked, and for once had nothing sharp to say. Months passed. The Aurelia Crown closed, then reopened under new leadership. Maya became part of a worker protection office that had real power, real reporting systems, and no quiet back doors where complaints could disappear. Former employees returned as consultants, supervisors, advocates, and witnesses to a rebuild that was not perfect, but was no longer built on fear. The Veil Foundation was gone. In its place, a new program was created to support workers, patients, and families who had been pushed aside by the old system. And Nora Bell, who had once carried wine through the ballroom hoping not to be noticed, became its chairwoman. On the night of the reopening, she stood backstage in the same hotel, wearing a deep blue dress and the repaired name tag still pinned near her heart. The crack was visible if someone looked closely. Nora liked it that way. Some things did not need to be hidden to be beautiful. Some broken things became proof. When she walked onto the stage, the applause rose slowly at first, then filled the whole ballroom. Workers stood. Former patients stood. Maya cried openly in the front row. Enzo clapped with both hands over his head. Luca stood near the back, away from the brightest light, watching her with an expression so gentle it would have shocked anyone who only knew his name from rumors. Nora looked out at the crowd. "I used to think powerful people only noticed others when they wanted to hurt them," she said. "I was wrong. Real power is not making people feel small. Real power is protecting people who have been told they do not matter. It is telling the truth when silence would be easier. It is choosing kindness when cruelty would get more attention." Her voice grew softer, but the room stayed with her. "A long time ago, I helped someone in a hospital because he needed help. I did not think it mattered beyond that night. But kindness remembers. It travels farther than we can see. Sometimes it comes back as a hand reaching for you in the dark." After the ceremony, Nora slipped away to the balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool against her face. Below, lights stretched across the streets and river, bright and endless. She heard the balcony door open behind her, but she did not turn right away. She knew his steps now. Luca came to stand beside her. "You were extraordinary," he said. Nora smiled faintly. "I was terrified." "I know." His mouth curved. "That is part of what made it extraordinary." For a while, they stood in silence. With anyone else, Nora might have felt the need to fill it, to explain herself, to soften her body, her words, her presence. With Luca, the silence did not ask anything from her. "I spent 7 years looking for the woman who saved my brother," Luca said. "I thought finding her would settle a debt." Nora looked at him. "Did it?" "No." His eyes stayed on hers. "It gave me a bigger one, because the woman I found did more than save Enzo. She reminded me that there is still goodness in this city that no one can buy, threaten, or fake." Nora's eyes stung, but she did not look away. Luca reached for her hand. "I love you, Nora, not because you saved him, not because you helped bring down the veils. I love you because when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain, you chose to care." For most of her life, Nora had believed love would have to arrive carefully, almost apologetically, as if anyone who wanted her would need to explain why. But Luca did not look ashamed. He did not look uncertain. He looked at her like the answer had been simple from the beginning. "I love you too," she whispered. The words frightened her, and freed her at the same time. Luca lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, not like a king rewarding someone beneath him, but like a man honoring the person who had changed the shape of his world. Inside the ballroom, people were still talking, laughing, rebuilding something that had once been rotten beneath the shine. Nora could hear Maya's voice, Enzo's laughter, the soft hum of music beginning again. She turned back toward the glass doors, then paused when she saw her reflection. A fat woman in a blue dress, a cracked name tag, soft arms, full cheeks, steady eyes. For years, people had looked at her and seen too much body and not enough person. Now she saw herself clearly, maybe for the first time. She had never been small. Other people had simply failed to see her. Luca stood beside her, still feared by many, still carrying shadows she would never pretend were not there. But with Nora, his hand was gentle. And Nora, who had once knelt alone in broken glass while a ballroom looked away, walked back inside with her head lifted. The same chandeliers glowed above her. The same marble floor shone beneath her feet. But the room was not the same, because she was not hiding from it anymore. Everyone knew the truth now. Nora Bell's kindness had saved a life, uncovered a dynasty of lies, and gave forgotten people a voice strong enough to shake the city. Cruelty had been loud that night. It had echoed through the ballroom with one slap and one ugly laugh. But kindness had gone deeper. It had waited 7 years. It had found its way back through darkness, fear, and broken doors. And when it finally returned, it did not come to destroy for the sake of destruction. It came as justice. It came as dignity. It came as Nora Bell, standing in the light, no longer asking the world for permission to matter.